Chapter 11:17. Danger, danger. I'll be troubling you then. The elder clasped his fist and bowed. Even though the young man had shown capabilities that far exceeded common geniuses, he still found it hard to believe that the other party could alter the vitreous heart-tempering sutra within such a short period of time. He had to confirm it with his own eyes. Having guessed the elder's thoughts, Zhongxian waved his hand, and line after line of words formed out of Zhenqi slowly appeared in the air. It was the altered vitreous heart-tempering sutra. This. Upon taking a look, the elder's body stiffened as incredulity crept into his gaze. With this alteration, the temptations will still appear, but in a progressive manner instead. This will allow those with a weaker state of mind to cultivate the secret art and slowly advance their proficiency. He had studied the vitreous heart-tempering sutra for many years, so he knew it inside out. The other party had not altered much of the sutra, but he had managed to change it from its very foundations. The prowess upon reaching major accomplishment had not changed, but the starting point had been lowered instead. In the past, even the head of the Combat Master Hall would have difficulties cultivating the technique, but now, even an ordinary 10-man commander could probably grasp it with ease. Seeing the elder trembling in agitation, Zhongxian smiled. Admittedly, the vitreous heart-tempering sutra was a hard-to-come-by technique. While it was not of much use to him, he could still impart it to Wang Ying and Liu Yang. It should complement the weaknesses in their state of mind, allowing them to reach even greater heights. More than that, if all combat masters could cultivate the technique, the overall fighting prowess of the Combat Master Hall could be brought to greater heights. The events in Qiuwu Palace had given him deeper respect toward master teachers. This was also why he had accepted Hall Master Xing's request readily. The elder bowed deeply. Allow me to thank you on behalf of the entire Combat Master Hall. You are being too polite. We are all master teachers, so it's only right for us to help one another. Zhongxian nodded. The elder had passed away many years ago, but he had chosen to leave behind his will to pass down his secret art, all in hopes that mankind could strive for greatness. His concern for the future of mankind was truly worthy of respect. Zhongxian's response made the elder nod in approval. Curious, he asked, considering your incredible mental resilience, I guess that you must be the newly elected head of the Heart Division? I'm not. Zhongxian shook his head. He was only dropping by the Combat Master Hall to help Hall Master Xing. He was not even a combat master, so how could he be a division head? The elder was taken aback for a moment before realization struck him. You aren't. Oh, I get it. Your strength must have been a factor limiting you from becoming a division head. After all, the minimum requirement is primordial spirit realm while you are only at Saint Wandan Pinnacle. Naturally, there was a requirement on one's cultivation before one could be qualified to become a division head. If they were to just go by the young man's mental resilience, he was definitely the best candidate to become the head of the Heart Division. However, it seemed like his cultivation had hindered him. Upon understanding what was going on, the elder said, "How about this then? As the founder of the Heart Division, I wield the ultimate control over the Heart Division. I'll give this to you as compensation for resolving my greatest regret. This way, once your cultivation reaches the mark, you'll automatically become the head of the Heart Division. Not even the Hall Master will be able to question the matter. Thank you for your concern, but it's fine." Zhongxian shook his head. He was not even interested in becoming a combat master, let alone the head of some Heart Division. Just as he was in the midst of rejecting the other party, he suddenly felt the elder before him sending a thought into his mind. As the thought fused with his mind, he suddenly found himself with perfect knowledge of all the formations in the Heart Division. With this, he had effectively gained full control over all of them. All right. With this, my job is done here. I will be entrusting the Heart Division to your hands. The transmission of thought had left the elder's soul fading even more. Even so, there was a satisfied smile on his face. The reason the elder had persisted for so long was due to his regret in being unable to find a successor whom he was truly satisfied with. Even though the cultivation of the young man before him was a little too low, his capability was truly not one to be underestimated. Under the other party's leadership, he was confident that the Heart Division could be brought to greater heights. With this, He was finally able to put down the baggage in his heart. But Seeing the elder's look, Zhongxian was deeply conflicted. While he was still in the midst of finding the words to explain his identity, the elder's soul was visibly growing more and more transparent, and eventually, with a light pop, it vanished altogether. Geez. Seeing that it was already too late for him to say anything, Zhongxian shook his head helplessly. Forget it. I'll just pass on the vitreous heart-tempering sutra to Hall Master Xing and Division Head Liao when I get out and let them deal with the matter. That should be more than enough. He simply was not interested in becoming a combat master, so he could not possibly become the head of the heart division. At the very least, if he could pass on the vitreous heart-tempering sutra to them, they would disseminate it. In a sense, he would be fulfilling the elder's final wishes as well. Having made up his mind, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. He took one last look around the room, and after confirming that there was really nothing around that he could temper his mind with, he began walking out with a disappointed look on his face. However, barely after taking a few steps out of the passageway, he suddenly felt a chilling sensation pounding on his heart, and goosebumps rose all over his skin. Trusting his instincts, he immediately executed his Heaven's Path divine art, and his figure vanished from the spot. The next moment, the hands of a cactus struck the place where he had been standing, creating a huge depression in his place. Hong Long. The cactus did not stop there just because he had missed. The following moment, Zhongxian felt the air crushing heavily down on him, threatening to flatten him into a sheet of paper. Narrowing his eyes, Zhongxian unhesitatingly halted in his direction of advance and forcefully leaped into the air. Paji. Right after he left the ground, a brilliant ray of light blasted across the area that he had been about to pass by earlier, crushing everything in its path callously. If he had been a second late in responding, he might have lost his life. Su. Before he had chance to catch his breath, the flash of a sword flew across the sky, headed for him. It seemed as if the assaulter had already calculated the trajectory of his movements. Despite his swift reaction, he was still unable to free himself from the relentless offense of the assaulters. If the previous two attacks were only to corner him, this attack was definitely a killing blow. The sword chi emanated by the sword covered every single path that he could escape to, leaving him no room to flee at all. What is going on? Zhongxian's complexion turned incredibly awful. He had never thought that he would be assaulted in the Combat Master Hall. However, this was no time to be thinking about the matter. If he could not overcome the attack before him, all that would be left of him was a cold, lifeless corpse. With a threat looming right before him, his mind whirred at great speed. In this moment, he seemed to have entered a unique state of mind. Under the assessment of the Eye of Insight, even the sword before him seemed to have slowed down. In this state of mind, Zhongxian found that he was completely composed and rational, and such a state allowed him to make the best decision before him. With a huge gust of wind, he compressed his body tightly together. Jeji. In the blink of an eye, from his initial height of 1.8 m, he was compressed into roughly the size of a watermelon. Putting aside the fact that sword chi had sealed his surroundings, preventing him from dodging at all, even if he had managed to dodge the attack by some chance, there was no knowing if the other party still had some other countermeasures to corner him further. At this rate, it was only a matter of time before he was killed. Since that was the case, he had to retaliate. Shortly after he compressed his body into a bundle, he felt a cold burst of air flying straight above his head. The sword barely nicked his skin, causing a stinging sensation. Break. Reverting back to his original form, Zhongxian swiftly shot his finger forward. Voila! Innumerable bursts of sword chi shot forth from his fingers. They swiftly flew toward the barrier of sword chi ahead of him that had sealed his surroundings, and reminiscent of rain striking down on a banana tree, the clash between the two produced relentless ding-ding-dang-dang sounds. From the previous few attacks, he could already tell that the other party's strength was far greater than his, at least reaching the level of primordial spirit pinnacle. With his current strength, there was no way he could face them head-on. Since that was the case, he would just have to overwhelm them by quantity. Relentless sword chi stormed forth from his finger and struck the barrier of sword chi. As powerful as the barrier was, it still swiftly thinned under the relentless attacks before eventually dissipating. What? This series of actions was completed in the blink of an eye. From the initial escape to retaliation, not even half a breath had passed. The one who had launched the attack clearly had not expected that he would be able to dodge the attack and even retaliate, breaking the barrier of sword chi, and he exclaimed in astonishment. "I have to flee now." Knowing that he was still in a dangerous position, Zhong Xian leaped forward and dashed as fast as he could. "Where do you think you're going?" A furious bellow sounded, and a massive palm print suddenly came falling down upon Zhong Xian. The palm print covered over a dozen square meters with him centered at the middle, thus effectively blocking his path of escape. With the speed that the palm print was heading toward him at, it was nigh impossible for him to escape in time. His combat sense is too strong. Zhong Xian's face turned grim. He had thought that he could make use of the other party's lapse in concentration to flee, but the other party had recovered faster than expected. Furthermore, the other party was even able to come up with an attack that could corner him within the blink of an eye. The other party's combat sense was truly frightening. Even Wu Shi could hardly compare to that. Zhong Xian knew that he would be severely injured once he was struck by the palm strike, and in his weakened state, there would be no way for him to escape with his life anymore. Thus, he quickly hastened his footsteps and rushed off as fast as he could. Voila! In the blink of an eye, he reached the corner of the hall. But at the same moment, the palm print had finally reached right above him. Break! Zhong Xian tapped his finger upwards. Wang! Something seemed to whir into life in the room, and the massive palm print froze in midair, as if a fish frozen within a block of ice. From the information imparted to him by the elder, he had gained a thorough understanding of the layout and formations within the heart division, allowing him to control them easily. From the very start, he knew that it would be hard for him to escape, so his movements were also calculated to head toward the center of the formation so as to activate it. If someone traced his path of movement from the moment he left the passageway of the trial, they would shockingly notice that it was actually a straight line right toward this point. In other words, even while dodging those attacks, he was still able to instantaneously find a way to resolve it and continue advancing forward. Considering that he was up against an opponent far stronger than him, this was definitely an incredible feat. With the formation active, Zhong Xian was finally able to see the faces of his assailants, and a cold gaze immediately slipped into his eyes. Hall Master Xing, Division Head Liao, and Division Head Wei, what are you three trying to do? They were the three experts of the Combat Master Hall. Chapter 11:18. Zhong Xian crushes the trio. Zhong Xian was extremely unhappy. It was out of goodwill that he had come over to help nourish Hall Master Xing's primordial spirit so that the latter could deal with whatever trouble he was facing. It was one thing for them not to compensate him, but they even launched an attack against him on top of that. If not for his swift reaction, he would have already been dead by now. Was this how the Combat Master Hall treated their benefactor? Why you? While Zhong Xian was fuming, Hall Master Xing and the others widened their eyes in shock, unable to speak a single word. Of the three of them, there was one who had reached half-leaving Aperture Realm while the other two were at Primordial Spirit Realm Pinnacle. With the three of them attacking in collaboration with one another, even a Saint 5 Dan primary stage expert could easily have been taken down if caught off guard. The young man was only at Saint 1 Dan Pinnacle, but he had still managed to escape from their encirclement unharmed. The combat sense and reflexes he had displayed had surpassed any one of them there, and more importantly, he was actually able to control the formations in the Heart Division. Wasn't only the head of the Heart Division able to control them? That should be our question instead. Speak, what is your motive for infiltrating our Combat Master Hall? After recovering from his shock, Hall Master Liao harumphed coldly. Flicking his wrist, he took out a token. The token was the symbol of authority of the Heart Division, and it was also the key to controlling the formations within it. Voila! A flash of light burst from the token, and the frozen palm print abruptly shook free from its restraints. With a resounding explosion, it burst forth once more. Humph! Sneering coldly, Division Head Liao was waiting for the palm print to fall upon Zhong Xian when it suddenly switched direction and headed toward the three of them. Hong Long! Astonished, the trio hurriedly retreated to dodge the palm strike. The palm print eventually struck the ground, creating a huge depression beneath it. At the same time, innumerable cracks crept across the ground within the room. Amid an intense gale that burst forth from the palm strike, the fruits on Hall Master Xing's head fell to the ground amid resounding plops. Division Head Liao, how in the world are you controlling your formation? Cloaked with a layer of dust, Division Head Wei roared furiously. At the same time, he gathered his zhunqi into his clenched fist and sent a powerful punch right toward Zhongxian. The might of the palm burst forth, crushing down in Zhongxian's direction. Humph! Zhongxian's eyebrows shot up as he stood his ground. Who? Before the punch could connect, it made an abrupt U-turn and returned right back at Division Head Wei himself. What? Shocked, Division Head Wei quickly thrusted his palm forward to ward off the might of his punch. Nevertheless, he was still forced to retreat 8 steps, and a numbing sensation engulfed his arm. The impact had also jolted his zhunqi, causing him to sustain some internal injuries. He had exerted his full might in the previous punch, and it seemed like the formation had further enhanced the strength of the punch before sending it back. With his last-moment defense, he inevitably ended up suffering some injuries from the encounter. Pale-faced, Division Head Wei roared furiously, "Liao Bujin, what the hell are you doing?" With his eye of discernment, it was apparent that it was the Heart Division's formation that caused his attack to turn against him. Given that Liao Bujin was the head of the Heart Division, it went without saying that he was the one who wielded absolute control over its formations. Yet, why was he helping the enemy instead? I have no idea. It is as if he has obtained higher control rights over the formations than me. Division Head Liao narrowed his eyes in horror. The formations in the Heart Division were left behind by the founder of the Heart Division, and its control rights were determined by a strict hierarchy. In fact, the head of the Heart Division was not chosen by nomination, but by whether one was able to control the formations of the Heart Division or not. Back then, it was because he had bested the other elders in terms of his control over the formations that he had been given the token, thus becoming the head of the Heart Division. Under normal circumstances, with the token in hand, there should have been no one in the Combat Master Hall who could surpass him in terms of control over the formations, and this included the Hall Master. So, how could the young man be able to supersede his control so easily? This should have been impossible. Seeing through the situation, Hall Master Xing turned to Zhongxian and asked, "How did you manage to obtain higher control rights over the Heart Division's formations than Division Head Liao?" However, Zhongxian was in no mood to answer their questions at this point. With an incredibly dark face, he said in a chilly tone, "It's under your invitation that I came here to nourish your primordial spirit. While some mishap happened in the midst of it, it's due to Division Head Wei abruptly barging into the room despite my warnings beforehand. I'm sure it should be apparent that I bear no ill intentions. Yet, not only did you not reciprocate my favor, you even turned around and assaulted me. Why?" Zhongxian's voice gradually grew colder and colder. As he spoke, he slowly walked step by step down from the sky. With every step that he took, the pressure that Hall Master Xing and the others felt intensified by a notch. After several steps, they felt as if they were shouldering an entire mountain, causing their legs to tremble uncontrollably. Cold sweat trickled ceaselessly down their faces. This immense pressure came from the formations of the Heart Division. Given that the other party was in control of the formations, he could easily kill all of them as long as he willed it to happen. I asked why. Zhongxian roared once more furiously. Voila! Unable to withstand it any longer, the trio collapsed to the ground. A stifling sensation choked them, and blood spurted from their mouths. Zhongxian was truly furious this time around. He had always acted by the principles that he deeply believed in. He did not think that he was a noble and selfless person, but at the very least, he had never done anything that went against his conscience. Even though a mishap did happen, it was a fact that he had helped to perfect Hall Master Xing's primordial spirit. And yet, these 3 combat masters had actually made an attempt on his life, and it was an attempt that was completely devoid of mercy. If it was not for his swift reflexes, he would have been dead already. He had been trying his best to find a way to resolve Hall Master Xing's condition, and yet, they actually attempted to kill him without rationalizing the situation. You are asking why, even though you have tried to kill our Hall Master? Division Head Liao spat indignantly as he tightened his grip around the token in his hand, wanting to wrestle back control over the formation. However, it was to no avail. Before the other party, it was as if his token as a mere toy. Putting aside controlling the formation, he found that he was even unable to feel it at all. This was how absolute the other party's control over the formation was. Kill your Hall Master. If I really wanted to kill him, do you think that he would still be alive and kicking now? Zhongxian sneered coldly as he flung his sleeves furiously. Peng! A powerful force struck Division Head Liao, and his body crashed heavily into the wall. He was completely helpless before the power of the Heart Division's formation. In truth, even though Zhongxian's cultivation was only at Saint One Dan, he still could have easily destroyed Hall Master Xing's primordial spirit earlier on. There was no need for him to go to such lengths to do it. As such, when he heard Division Head Liao replying him with such a ridiculous reason, he could not hold back his temper any longer. Seeing that his companion was wounded, Division Head Wei clenched his jaws furiously. With more than 100 inner demons in your heart, do you honestly expect us to believe that you wanted our Hall Master to bear his primordial spirit out of goodwill? Considering how the wall had turned so dark after the other party had entered the trial of inner demons, it was apparent to see that he harbored malicious intentions at heart. No matter how he tried to reason his actions, they were bound to be excuses. Inner demons. Zhongxian frowned. He had not really thought that the trio would attempt to kill him for such a reason. So that's why you attacked me? Zhongxian gazed down on them coldly. Those inner demons aren't mine. I was assaulted by the sky-bearing bandit Kang Shu back at the Spirit Awakener Guild, and a sliver of his soul ended up latching onto me. It was his soul that resulted in the congregation of inner demons. If it had been anyone else, he wouldn't have bothered to waste his words. He would have just pummeled them straight to vent his anger and return some sense back into their heads. However, he was in the Combat Master Hall, and as the principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, his actions were representative of the entire organization. Given that the Shenxian faction was going to have an exchange with the Combat Master Hall very soon, it could prove to be very troublesome later on if he beat up the Hall Master and 2 division heads. The other party might even vent their anger on his students. Considering that they were in Qingyuan City, the other party's home turf, he had no choice but to hold himself back. Kang Shu? Hall Master Xing and the others were stunned to hear that name. He had heard how the fellow was stomped to death by the guild building. If one had to compile a list of the 10 most unforgivable criminals in Qingyuan Empire, that fellow would definitely have been on the list. Indeed. I have already killed that fellow and taken down all of the inner demons. Zhongxian harumphed coldly. If I really have hundreds of inner demons, do you think that I could walk out from the trial of inner demons perfectly fine? This. The trio froze. The other party was right. If those inner demons were indeed his, even with the safety measures in the formation, he would still have been driven to a state of near insanity by the simultaneous onslaught of the inner demon. Considering how the other party was in a completely rational state, capable of making astute judgments in battle and analyzing the situation keenly, it did appear that he was unfazed by the inner demons. Zhongxian gazed down on Hall Master Xing coldly. Besides, if I really intend you harm, do you think that I would have entered the trial of inner demons just to cause problems for myself? To deal with our Hall Master, it's natural that you would have to gain our trust first. You could have known of the existence of the trial of inner demons beforehand and made countermeasures against it, only for the countermeasures to fail halfway through the trial, argued Division Head Liao. If possible, they would not doubt their benefactor either. However, when they thought back about what had happened, everything seemed too coincidental to be true. Just as they were about to find a powerful Spirit Awakener, he suddenly appeared in the Spirit Awakener Guild. It should have only been an ordinary spirit enchantment, but it ended up turning Hall Master Xing into a flowering cactus. It was not to say that the points raised by the other party did not make sense, but there were still too many doubtful points for them to simply accept it as it was. It was due to these doubts that they harbored that they were swiftly convinced that the other party was up to no good upon finding out that there were so many inner demons in the other party's heart. All right then. Let's take a step back and not debate whether I would have to win your trust before dealing with your Hall Master. With just my control over the Heart Division's formations, do you think that anyone will be able to stop me if I attempt to kill the 3 of you? Placing his hands behind his back, Zhongxian spoke with the utmost arrogance. So what if they were combat masters? With the many formations of the Heart Division under his control, he was the sole sovereign within this space. If he wanted to make a move, he could have easily killed the trio without anyone being any the wiser. Hearing those words, the trio fell silent. That was indeed true. Perhaps the other party might still have needed to resort to schemes beforehand, but with the formations of the Heart Division now under his absolute control, there was no need for him to waste his breath on them. Seeing that the trio was unable to speak a word, Zhongxian continued. Hall Master Xing, if I'm not mistaken, your primordial spirit suffered significant damage in the past, right? That's right. 25 years ago, I fought with an otherworldly demon king in the subterranean gallery and ended up being wounded by him, Hall Master Xing replied. There were quite a few people within the Combat Master Hall who were aware of the wounds his primordial spirit had suffered. Back then, his injuries were so severe that he had nearly lost his life. He was unconscious for 3 whole years, and if not for the relentless effort of the old guild leader of the Physician Guild, he might have just passed away back then. However, it was a pity that the old guild leader suddenly went missing after saving him, leaving him unable to repay the other party's favor. That had become a huge regret of his. Sighing deeply, Zhongxian began explaining with a softened tone. The damage sustained by your primordial spirit has ended up leaving behind a huge rift in it. I used my spirit enchantment to help cover up your rift, but Division Head Wei Yi entered at that crucial moment, and your awakening primordial spirit ended up ejecting my consciousness from your mind. After which, while you were attacked by the inner demons, the enchanted spirit ended up fusing completely with your primordial spirit, thus resulting in that weird form of yours. It's indeed my fault for not explaining things to you earlier, but it was definitely not my intention to harm you. This. Hall Master Xing's face paled. He had felt his primordial spirit becoming much more wholesome than before, but as he had not done a thorough check, he didn't notice that the rift had been healed. Upon hearing Zhongxian's words, he hurriedly looked inwardly to check on his primordial spirit, and a moment later, his eyes widened in astonishment and delight. You treated the rift in my primordial spirit? Hall Master Xing asked hoarsely. He could hardly believe what had happened to him. The huge rift in his primordial spirit had become a huge bottleneck for his cultivation. He had sought many formidable physicians due to that matter, but all was helpless before that issue. 20 years had passed, and he had already given up hope. The reason he intended to challenge the trial of inner demons was in hopes that perhaps that highest secret art could repair that wound of his. Although, to be honest, he did not harbor much hope for that either. He had thought that his cultivation would be capped at this level for his entire life, and never had he thought that the spirit awakener before him would actually successfully repair his primordial spirit. How could he have made an attempt on the life of his great benefactor? Chapter 11:19. Zhongxian imparts a technique. I have misunderstood you. Please accept my sincerest apologies, Hall Master Xing said as he bowed deeply. Putting everything aside, if the other party truly intended to kill him, why would he have repaired his primordial spirit in the first place? There was no need for him to do so at all. Furthermore, just as the other party had said, if the other party wanted to kill him, given his control over the formations, he would have just done it. There was no need for him to waste his breath. To think that he, as the head of the Combat Master Hall, actually tried to kill a man who was earnestly doing his best to help him. A deep feeling of guilt and shame crushed down on his heart, choking him within. Subconscious bias had influenced his train of thought, and the trial of inner demons had further dulled his judgment. Otherwise, someone of his wits should have been able to figure all of that out. After all we have done, we dare not ask for Sun Sha's forgiveness. We only hope that you will give us an opportunity to compensate you. No matter what it is, we will definitely have it done without the slightest complaint, Hall Master Xing implored. They were at fault for this matter, and no matter what, they had to clear things up. Putting aside the fact that this matter would bring shame to the Combat Master Hall, they would not even be able to forgive themselves. I don't need your compensation. However, if you are willing to trust me, I can resolve your problem right now, Zhongxian replied. He was still angry over the matter, but at the very least, the other party had not done what they did out of ill will against him. Rather than souring the relations with the Combat Master Hall just so that he could vent his emotions, It would be better if he could use this incident to forge a sense of camaraderie between them and the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy instead. Of course, I trust Sun She. Hearing the other party not asking for compensation and even offering to resolve his problem for him, Hall Master Xing could not help but feel deeply grateful and ashamed at the same time. This was the magnanimity of a true master teacher. Compared to him, they seemed like hypocrites instead. Zhong Xian nodded. All right, I'll need you to lower the defenses around your primordial spirit. Very well. Without any hesitation, Hall Master Xing sat down on the ground and bared his primordial spirit to the other party without any reservations. Given that the other party controlled the formations of the heart division, there would have been nothing he could do even if the other party meant him harm. Since he was completely helpless, he might as well just completely let go. This way, he would at least be able to salvage the situation a little by displaying his trust in the other party. Seeing that the other party was cooperating with him obediently, Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief. It was indeed difficult to deal with a spirit once it had fused with the cultivator's primordial spirit. Nevertheless, if he could slip his consciousness into the other party's primordial spirit and specifically pinpoint the location of the target, it would not be too difficult to eliminate it. Thus, Zhong Xian extended his consciousness into Hall Master Xing's primordial spirit and began his work. Not too long later, he heaved a sigh of relief. Sun She, how is it? Division heads Liao and Wei asked anxiously. Take a look for yourself. Zhong Xian left them those words and sat down on the ground to recuperate. The other party's primordial spirit was simply too strong, such that he had to exert a lot of energy in order to maneuver his consciousness within it to find the spirit. Even though the process had only taken 10 short minutes, it had ended up depleting his soul energy by almost 80%. Boom! A while later, a loud buzz suddenly sounded from Hall Master Xing's body, and amid a brilliant glow, a primordial spirit suddenly gushed out of his body. Leaving Aperture Realm. Division heads Liao and Wei widened their eyes in disbelief. Just how long did it take for them to achieve a breakthrough? Returning his primordial spirit back to his body, Hall Master Xing opened his eyes once more. He jolted his body, and the cactus on his head and the flower on his bottom fell to the ground before withering to death. Turning to the young man, he kneeled down in gratitude. Thank you, Sun She. His primordial spirit had long reached a level far surpassing any other half-leaving Aperture Realm expert. Were it not for his injury, he would have achieved a breakthrough many years ago. After his trauma was resolved with Zhong Xian's help, his flow of power finally became whole again, and with the incredible accumulation of power he had, he was able to achieve a breakthrough easily on the spot. Of course, while he had managed to draw his primordial spirit out from his body, he had not undergone the lightning ordeal yet, so he could not be considered a full-fledged leaving Aperture Realm expert. Nevertheless, he was still many times stronger than before. He could not help but feel incredibly blessed to have met with Sun She. Despite all of the misunderstandings between the both of them, the other party was willing to shrug off the matter magnanimously and treat him. In that moment, he was filled with nothing but admiration for the other party. There's no need to stand on ceremony. Zhong Xian swiftly helped the other party up. At that moment, he suddenly recalled a certain matter, and he said, previously, after I cleared the trial of inner demons, I met with the founder of the heart division. Sun She met with the founder. But, despite Kang Shu introducing so many inner demons into the trial, you were still able to successfully clear the trial? Everyone leaped in shock. This was especially so for the head of the heart division, division head Liao. His eyes were widened in disbelief. Initially, considering that the other party's cultivation was only at Saint One Dan, he had thought that it was unlikely for him to clear the trial. Furthermore, the other party had said that Kang Shu's primordial spirit had drawn in more than 100 inner demons, and that only further convinced him so. He had thought that the other party had only managed to get away unscathed by backing out of the formation through using some unknown method, while his mind was rational the moment that the inner demons appeared. But who knew that the other party had managed to clear the trial? He knew full well how difficult the trial of inner demons was. Of the many generations of Hall Masters, only 5 had cleared the trial. Yet, a Saint One Dan cultivator had actually managed to clear it. This was too fearsome. After a moment of shock, Division Head Liao asked, "Did the founder impart the Vitreous Heart-Tempering Sutra to Sun She?" "He did." Zhong Xian nodded before continuing. "Since all of you are around, let me impart the secret art to the rest of you. It should prove to be useful in helping you all temper your state of mind. You want to impart it to us?" Hall Master Xing swiftly shook his head with a bitter smile. "I appreciate Sun She's kind gesture, but there are fundamental requirements to cultivating that secret art. Until we are able to clear the trial of inner demons with our own ability, we will only hurt ourselves by cultivating the secret art." They would have loved to cultivate the strongest technique of the Combat Master Hall as well, but it was a pity that they were not strong enough to overcome the temptations of the mind. Even with the secret art right before them, they would not dare touch it. Otherwise, it might just very well cost them their lives. In the many millenniums of history behind the Combat Master Hall, there had been a handful of combat masters who did not believe in such matters and demanded to learn the Vitreous Heart-Tempering Sutra from the Hall Master, and eventually, their cultivation all ended up going berserk. It was for this reason that it was eventually firmly sealed behind the trial of inner demons of the Heart Division, becoming one of the forbidden secret arts of the Combat Master Hall. In truth, they could not help but feel deeply impressed by the young man before them. Despite his young age, he had already attained a state of mind far beyond theirs, and with his own prowess, he had managed to earn the right to cultivate the secret art. They hoped to do the same, too, but it was still impossible for them in their current state. The dangers concerning the Vitreous Heart-Tempering Sutra were in no way exaggerated. Once a cultivator started to cultivate the secret art and fell for its temptation, they would find themselves unable to stop cultivating, and it was a matter of time before disaster struck. The secret art did have such a flaw previously, but there's no need to worry about it anymore. You can take a look at it first before deciding on whether you want to cultivate the technique or not. Zhong Xian chuckled as he raised his hand. A screen of Zhunqi appeared before him, and a string of gleaming words materialized in midair. "This." Not expecting the other party to show the secret art to them without any reservations, Hall Master Xing and the others felt a little conflicted. It might seem as if there was no harm just looking at it, but even they could not guarantee that they would not succumb to the temptation of the technique and cultivate it. But again, as combat masters, avid pursuers of strength, it was extremely difficult for them to turn their eyes away when they knew that a powerful secret art stood before them. Curiosity gnawed at their hearts. "Forget it. It won't hurt to take a look." Eventually, the trio failed to withstand the allure of the secret art and began examining the secret art manual in the air. Perplexed frowns gradually crept onto their faces. Their eyes of discernment might not have been on par with the founder of the Heart Division, but they were still top-notch experts of the Combat Master Hall. With their deep experience and knowledge of all kinds of secret arts, it did not take them long to realize that the secret art was a little different from how it had been described to them. Astonishingly, the prerequisite mental resilience to begin cultivating the technique was not high at all. Putting aside them, even ordinary combat masters would be able to practice it without facing any serious danger. This. The trio traded intrigued gazes with one another. After a long moment of silence, Hall Master Xing asked hesitantly, "Sun She, are you certain that this is the Vitreous Heart-Tempering Sutra?" "It is." Zhong Xian nodded. "But that secret art can't be cultivated by those who lack mental resilience." Hall Master Xing muttered in confusion. "That's right. The secret art did have such an issue when I first obtained it." Zhong Xian nodded. "I thought that it was a huge flaw, so I casually changed some parts of it. Now, even ordinary cultivators should be able to practice it." "You casually changed some parts of it? Sun She, did you really alter the Vitreous Heart-Tempering Sutra?" The three combat masters felt the back of their throats turning dry, and their bodies began shaking involuntarily. The secret art had been around ever since the founding of the Heart Division. If it could be altered that easily, one of the countless geniuses in the long history of the Combat Master Hall would have long done so. Sun She had barely been in the Heart Division for 20 minutes, and within this period of time, not only did he deal with the 100 inner demons from Kang Shu, he even inherited the heritage and altered it on a whim. "You must be joking with us. You've got to be. That is the greatest secret art of the Combat Master Hall. Is it really possible to change it just like that? Indeed. The secret art had simply too many flaws, and more importantly, ordinary cultivators were not even able to cultivate it at that. A flawed technique that ordinary cultivators are unable to practice. Is there a reason for such a technique to continue existing in the world? Zhong Xian shook his head. Honestly, I have no idea why the founder of the Heart Division left such a secret art behind. To regard a secret art that no one was able to cultivate as its unparalleled treasure, this combat master Hall sure was. Zhong Xian shook his head. It's pity that I wasn't able to correct all of the flaws due to my ineptitude. I was only able to lower the prerequisites of the technique such that ordinary cultivators are able to practice it. It's still rather lacking, but I'm afraid that you will have to just make do with it. He was still lacking books on the aspect of tempering one's mind, so he could only alter it this far for the time being. Honestly speaking, he could not help but feel a little embarrassed for imparting a technique riddled with flaws to others. The simplified Heaven's Path techniques that he would usually impart to others might have its flaws as well, but they numbered very few. However, as for this vitreous heart tempering sutra, he had only altered one of the flaws, and there were still many more within it. If others were to learn that he was the one who had passed this technique over to the Combat Master Hall, he might just die of shame. Limits of your knowledge? Make do with it. The trio staggered upon hearing those words, and they nearly collapsed to the floor. Big brother, are you sure you aren't joking with us? Generation after generation of our predecessors have failed to achieve what you did. If what you have done is considered ineptitude, shouldn't our predecessors have just banged their heads against the walls to repent for their uselessness? And more importantly, it is such a profound cultivation technique, but why do you keep speaking of it with disdain, as if it is little more than trash? Noticing the bizarre expressions on the faces of the trio, Zhong Xian thought that they were worrying about the dangers of cultivating the newly modified secret art, so he quickly clarified the matter. Are you afraid that I might have altered it incorrectly? Don't worry, your founder has taken a look at it personally and confirmed that it's fine. It's also for this reason that he passed down the top authority over the formations in the Heart Division to me. The founder has taken a look at it as well. While the trio was shocked by the news, realization also struck them at the same time. They had been wondering how the other party had suddenly gained control over the Heart Division's formations just after making a trip into the trial of inner demons. It turned out that the founder had passed his control rights over. Just that gesture in itself was sufficient to prove that there was no mistake in the other party's alteration. Otherwise, the founder could not have possibly gone to the extent of passing his authority over to a stranger. To receive the recognition of the founder and gain authority over the Heart Division's formations. Wouldn't that mean that the time the other party had spent on altering the secret art was far less than 20 minutes? To be able to alter their highest secret art so quickly. Could it be that Sun Sha's greatest strength lay not in spirit enchantment but his comprehension of cultivation techniques? Chapter 1120, Hall Master Xing's Doubts. Thank you, Sun Sha. As shocked as they were, they knew that it wasn't the time to be pondering over this matter. They quickly turned their gazes back to the secret art and began memorizing it. They understood full well the significance of the lowered prerequisites for the cultivation of the Vitreous Heart Tempering Sutra to the Combat Master Hall. The other party could have hidden the fact that he had obtained the heritage from them, and no one would have been any wiser either. Using the secret art, he could have easily drawn in countless pursuers and form his own influence, thus bringing him immense power and vast riches. Alternatively, he could have also used the secret art as a leverage to make demands out of them. Considering that it was their highest secret art on the line, they would have no choice but to bow to anything that the other party demanded. But the other party didn't choose to do so. In fact, he even tossed it back to them as if it was nothing at all. This magnanimity was something they could never hope to match up to. It was laughable how they had actually doubted the character of such a noble person. Their faces reddened in shame, and they would dive into a hole to hide in if there was one beside them in this very instant. All along, they had thought that given that everyone had their own greed and desires, true selflessness was impossible. However, the young man before them had overturned that belief. Only a man like him could bear the title of a teacher without any guilt. Sun Sha, Your impartation of the Vitreous Heart-Tempering Sutra to our Qingyuan Empire Combat Master Hall makes you a half-teacher to all of us. From now onward, no matter what request you have of us, our Combat Master Hall will surely have it accomplish at all costs. After taking several more looks at the Vitreous Heart-Tempering Sutra and confirming that it was suitable for everyone to cultivate, Hall Master Xing stepped forward and clasped his fist earnestly. While this secret art was left behind by the founder of the Heart Division, the young man before him did make a huge alteration to the technique, so it could be said that he had a claim to it as well. Since they were going to cultivate the other party's technique, that would effectively make the other party their half-teacher. No matter, the Qingyuan conferred empire truly owed the young man a huge debt this time around. This wasn't a debt which could be repaid just by offering a little bit of help here and there. Hall Master Xing, there's no need to stand on ceremony. Not expecting the other party to take the matter so seriously, Zhongxian hurriedly waved his hands to indicate that it wasn't a huge issue. That can't do. Sun Shi, you have truly done our Combat Master Hall a great favor this time around. With the Vitreous Heart-Tempering Sutra you have imparted us, the overall fighting prowess of our Combat Master Hall would be raised immensely. With this, we would be able to deal with our current crisis easily. Hall Master Xing replied earnestly. There were two reasons why the members of the Combat Master Hall were too easily seduced by the Shenxian faction. Firstly, the Shenxian faction's grasp of combat knowledge was indeed far superior to theirs, even Hall Master Xing had to admit that. Secondly, it would be due to their lacking mental resilience against temptations. However, with the Vitreous Heart-Tempering Sutra being made commonplace, the overall prowess of the combat masters would be enhanced. With this, they might stand a chance in besting the Shenxian faction in the exchange 3 days from now. Indeed, if one were to cultivate the secret art diligently, it'll help them to maintain their clarity of mind, allowing them to withstand the beguilement of the inner demons. At the same time, the enhanced state of mind will also boost one's comprehension of battle techniques and combat. It'll indeed boost the prowess of the combat masters significantly. Zhongxian nodded. At this point, he suddenly recalled a matter and asked, "Right, I have some students who are severely lacking in their mental resilience. Will it be fine for me to impart the secret art to them as well?" No matter what, the Vitreous Heart-Tempering Sutra was still the highest secret art of the Combat Master Hall. He should still seek the other party's permission before imparting it to Wang Ying and the others in the Shenxian faction. Of course, since the founder has imparted the technique to you, and you have also made significant improvements in it, you are free to do anything you want with it. Hall Master Xing said with a smile. It wasn't a problem for the technique to be passed down to just a couple of students. Division heads Liao and Wei also nodded in agreement. Such an act wouldn't harm the interests of their Combat Master Hall, so there was no need for them to oppose it. Allow me to thank the Combat Master Hall on their behalf then. Zhongxian bowed. Wang Ying, Liu Yang, and the others from the Shenxian faction were still too young. It was inevitable that they would be disadvantaged in terms of their state of mind against the combat masters. However, if they could cultivate the Vitreous Heart-Tempering Sutra, that flaw of theirs could be resolved. At the very least, they wouldn't panic in the midst of battle, and that would give the Shenxian faction a better chance in the battle. Sun Shi, you are too polite. The others quickly clasped their fists respectfully. After chatting for a while longer, Zhongxian suddenly recalled a certain matter, and he asked, "Will it be inconvenient for me to ask what kind of trouble is the Combat Master Hall facing?" This was the second time he was asking this question. The other party agreeing to allow him to impart the Vitreous Heart-Tempering Sutra to his students and the members of the Shenxian faction was a huge favor to him. For this, he didn't mind helping the other party resolve their problem. Also, he was also a little curious as to know what kind of problem the Combat Master Hall was facing that would leave even the formidable Hall Master Xing in such a panic. I thank Sun Shi for your concern, but with this Vitreous Heart-Tempering Sutra, I am confident that we should be able to overcome the crisis easily. Hall Master Xing replied with a smile. The other party had already done them a huge favor by simplifying the Vitreous Heart-Tempering Sutra to a level where each and every combat master would be able to cultivate it. If they still couldn't resolve the problem like that, their Combat Master Hall would have no face to continue existing in this world. Hall Master Xing. Right after he had said those words, Division Head Liao suddenly turned to him and discreetly sent a telepathic message over. Despite possessing only a cultivation of Saint Wundan Pinnacle, Sunsha was able to avoid our collaborative offense without incurring any injuries. His fighting prowess is truly terrifying. If we could have him to teach our combat masters, the overall prowess of our Combat Master Hall would surely rise swiftly. This Hall Master Xing was a little taken aback by the proposal. He hadn't really thought about it, but the young man before him had achieved an astounding level in his comprehension of combat despite his Saint Wundan Pinnacle cultivation. Even with his breakthrough to leaving Aperture Realm, it was highly likely that he would be no match for the other party once he suppressed his cultivation to Saint Wundan Pinnacle too. With his prowess, he was bound to be far stronger than those of the Shenxian faction. If he could step forward to teach their combat masters, it could be foreseen that there would be a significant surge in the prowess of the Combat Master Hall. By then, it wouldn't be a problem for them to defeat the Shenxian faction and regain their honor. It's indeed a good idea, but our Combat Master Hall is already deeply indebted to the other party. We can't let him do anything for us anymore. Hall Master Xing replied with a frown. Division Head Liao's idea was good, but they couldn't just keep accepting the goodwill of the other party without reciprocating. Besides, for the Combat Master Hall to be unable to deal with an academy from a Tier 1 empire, forced to the extent of engaging the help of a Spirit Awakener. How shameful it would be. You're right. Understanding Hall Master Xing's point of view, Division Head Liao nodded and fell silent. On the other hand, hearing Hall Master Xing's confident response, Zhongxian nodded, that's good. He knew that it wouldn't be appropriate for him to probe any further at this point, or else it would as good as casting doubt over the capability of the Combat Master Hall. Thus, he hesitated for a brief moment before continuing. To tell you the truth, I do have something to ask of you. Feel free to speak. Hall Master Xing replied hurriedly. Is it possible for me to access all of the Saint 2 Dan and above cultivation technique manuals in your Combat Master Hall? Recently, I have reached a bottleneck in my cultivation, and I need to accrue as much knowledge as possible in order to converge my cultivation together. Zhongxian said. It had been a month since he had reached Saint Wundan Pinnacle at the Qiuwu Palace. His physical body, zhenqi, and soul cultivation had already reached their limits long ago, and it was about time for him to achieve a breakthrough. To be honest, it was deeply embarrassing for him to be stuck at Saint Wundan Pinnacle for such a long period of time. Our Combat Master Hall do have cultivation technique manuals of Saint 2 Dan and above, but I'm afraid that we don't have too many of them. Hall Master Xing was visibly surprised by Zhongxian's request for a moment before nodding. There aren't much of them? Zhongxian asked with a deep frown. Typically speaking, the Master Teacher Pavilion would have a huge collection of cultivation technique manuals numbering in millions so that Master Teachers could easily access whatever information they required. So, why would Hall Master Xing say that there wasn't much of them? Unlike the Master Teacher Pavilion, where Master Teachers can access all cultivation techniques once their cultivation reaches the required level, Combat Masters have to overcome certain trials before they can claim any cultivation technique. Seeing the incomprehension in Zhongxian's eyes, Hall Master Xing explained. In the Master Teacher Pavilion, as long as one's Master Teacher rank and cultivation realm reached the required level, or if they were to accrue sufficient contribution points, they would be granted access to the cultivation techniques correspondingly. However, the Combat Master Hall didn't obey by the same rules. Combat Masters were expected to wield fighting prowess at the apex of humanity, so they had to temper their strength to the very limits of their cultivation realm and prove it so through clearing a trial would they be able to obtain the cultivation technique manuals for the next realm. Otherwise, if one failed to reinforce their cultivation sufficiently at a certain realm, their subsequent cultivation would become unstable. This meant that they would no longer be able to retain their strength of being at the apex of their cultivation realm, and it could also hinder them from reaching greater heights in their cultivation as well. As our Combat Master Hall is born for the sole purpose of combat, Combat Masters would cultivate the same cultivation technique as one another so as to make it more convenient for them to collaborate with one another in combat or amalgamate their zhenqi together to generate a force far beyond their individual limits. Thus, the quantity of cultivation technique manuals that we have here is much fewer than that in the Master Teacher Pavilion. Hall Master Xing explained. Zhongxian nodded in realization. The Combat Master Hall was effectively the army of the Master Teacher Pavilion, so naturally, their cultivation techniques would be geared towards maximizing their prowess, especially through teamwork. For this purpose, it was necessary for them to cultivate specific cultivation techniques so that they could better aid and complement one another in battle. Of course, even though our cultivation technique manuals number few, I can assure their guarantee. They should prove to be a great source of inspiration to you. Besides, even though I did say their quantity is limited, we still do have a few hundreds of them here to cater to those of differing constitutions. Hall Master Xing didn't know why Sun Shi would ask for quantity instead of quality, but since the other party had made such a request, he was bound to have a rationale behind it. Naturally, he should first clarify things up so as to prevent a misunderstanding from occurring. Several hundred cultivation technique manuals will do as well. Where do I have to go to access them, and what kind of trials will I have to undergo? Zhongxian asked. To be honest, he was also a little curious to learn what kind of trials that combat masters undergo too. He hadn't tested out his newfound strength as a celestial saint yet. This would be a good opportunity for him to assess where his strength stood against the rest of the Master Teacher continent. The cultivation techniques are in the Inner Breath Division. It happens that I am the head of the Inner Breath Division, so allow me to bring you over, Division Head Wei said with a smile. I'll be counting on you then. Zhongxian nodded with a smile. Since the other party didn't want him to interfere in their private affairs, he wasn't interested in becoming a busybody either. No matter what, since he had come to the Combat Master Hall, he should at least use this opportunity to raise his strength by at least a little. Sun Shi, this way please. Division Head Wei bade Hall Master Xing farewell before leading Zhongxian out. Upon the departure of the duo, Division Head Liao turned to Hall Master Xing and asked in bewilderment, have you ever heard of anyone deriving inspiration by reading a huge variety of cultivation technique manuals? Wouldn't it just make it harder for one to discern the truth from the false, befuddling their train of thoughts further instead? I have never heard of such a thing either, but one thing is for sure. Sun Shi is a true genius. Most likely, only Zhongxian of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy could be a match for him. Halfway through his words, Hall Master Xing suddenly froze. Wait a moment. Zhongxian has just arrived in Qingyuan City, and Sun Shi appeared shortly afterward. Furthermore, the both of them seem to be around the same age, and they are both top-notch geniuses. Division Head Liao, where is the painting of Zhongxian where Zhou Qingfeng sent to us previously? Bring it over to me. Back then, I had only taken a glance at it and thought much of it. But this. I need to take another look to verify the matter. Chapter 1121, Elder Qi Zhou Qingfeng did send a painting of Zhongxian to the Combat Master Hall along with his report back then. However, Hall Master Xing didn't think that he was someone whom he needed to take note of back then, so he didn't pay much heed to the matter. After taking a swift glance at it, he had left his subordinates to deal with it. After all, a person of his position could not possibly be expected to deal with every miscellaneous matter that came his way. If that was really the case, he would have died from exhaustion by now. However, thinking about how Sun Qiong and Zhongxian were of identical ages and were both geniuses, he could not help but pause for a moment. Yes, the world was huge and had no lack of geniuses. However, those whose talents had reached such an astounding level were still hard to come by. Surely it was too much of a coincidence for two to appear in Qingyuan City simultaneously, right? I'll go and take a look. Nodding, Division Head Liao was about to head out when a frown abruptly surfaced on Hall Master Xing's forehead. Seemingly sensing something, he whipped out a communication jade token. Swiftly browsing through its content, Hall Master Xing's eyes lit up, and his eyes reddened in agitation. What happened? Division Head Liao asked. Hall Master Xing rarely allowed himself to show such intense emotions. Something major must have happened for him to react in such a manner. Elder Qi has returned, Hall Master Xing said with clenched fists. Elder Qi? You mean the ex-head of the Physician Guild? Back then, he disappeared shortly after saving you, and I thought that he might have already passed away. Division Head Liao was surprised by the news, too. More than 2 decades ago, Hall Master Xing had been severely wounded by an otherworldly demon, and that had caused massive damage to his primordial spirit, causing him to lose consciousness for 3 whole years. If not for Elder Qi, he might have been dead by now. When he finally regained consciousness, he had intended to repay the favor to the other party, only to find that the other party had suddenly disappeared from the face of the world. He had tried searching for the old physician, but for 20 years, there had been no news whatsoever. Just as he was on the verge of resigning himself to the fact that Elder Qi really might have passed away, the other party suddenly returned. I thought so, too, but it seems like we were mistaken. We'll deal with the matter of the painting later on. For the time being, help me prepare some gifts. I want to pay a visit to him personally, Hall Master Xing said in agitation. At this point, there was nothing more important than the return of his benefactor. The duo swiftly made some preparations before rushing out of the Combat Master Hall. Before long, they had arrived at the Physician Guild and successfully met with Elder Qi. It seemed like 20 years had not made the old guild leader age in the slightest. If any, his aura seemed to have become even sharper than before. Congratulations to Elder Qi for successfully making a breakthrough to half-leaving Aperture Realm. Hall Master Xing clasped his fist in agitation. In the past 20 years, it seemed like the old guild leader had advanced his cultivation considerably. This was a matter to celebrate. It seems like you have also made quite some advancement in your cultivation. Not bad, not bad. Naturally, Elder Qi could also see through Hall Master Xing's cultivation easily as well, and he nodded in approval. I am truly grateful to Elder Qi for saving my life back then. Hall Master Xing clasped his fist before asking, Elder Qi, why did you suddenly depart from Qingyuan City back then? Upon hearing Hall Master Xing bringing up the matter, Elder Qi sighed deeply. There's a long story behind this matter. I did not leave the city voluntarily. Instead, someone poisoned me and sent assailants to end my life. Cornered, I could only flee to a Tier 1 empire and lie low, or else I would have been a dead man by now. Poisoned? End your life? Hall Master Xing's face turned livid, and killing intent burst forth from him. Elder Qi was an upright and respected figure in Qingyuan City. During his time in the Physician Guild, he had saved countless lives, so who in the world would dare make a move against him? Furthermore, right under the nose of the Combat Master Hall at that. Elder Qi, do you know who poisoned you? Hall Master Xing asked with a chilling gleam in his gaze. I have a good idea who it is, but the implications behind this matter are too great, so I need to verify the matter first. The reason I informed you of my return is because I need to discuss this matter with you. At the same time, I hope to seek refuge with the Combat Master Hall for the time being while I reinforce my cultivation and decide on my next course of action. Elder Qi replied grimly. Seek refuge? At our Combat Master Hall? Hall Master Xing's eyes narrowed. Even though Elder Qi did not specify a name, just the very fact that he had to seek refuge in the Combat Master Hall had already severely narrowed the scope. Despite the fact that Elder Qi was the ex-head of the Physician Guild, as well as half-leaving Aperture Realm expert, for him to need to seek refuge in the Combat Master Hall. The person who poisoned him was bound to be a person who wielded incredible power or influence. Very well. I will guarantee your safety. Hall Master Xing nodded grimly. The Combat Master Hall was symbolic of the greatest fighting prowess of the Qingyuan conferred empire. Putting aside the fact that he had already reached leaving Aperture Realm, even with his previous strength as a half-leaving Aperture Realm, he could still easily deal with any ordinary leaving Aperture Realm cultivator. More importantly, there were countless formations spread across the 10 divisions of the Combat Master Hall. Anyone who dared barge in was simply courting death. I'll be thanking Hall Master Xing in advance then. I did not think that the day would come when I would be able to return back to Qingyuan City either. If not for my benefactor saving my life, I probably would have been stuck in that Tier 1 empire for the rest of my life. Recalling his previous experiences, Elder Qi couldn't help but sigh deeply. Hall Master Xing was astounded by Elder Qi's words. For you to be unable to resolve the poison despite your deep mastery in the way of medicine, could the benefactor you spoke of possess greater medical skills than you? He knew full well how formidable Elder Qi's medical skills were. Even if he was not the #1 physician of the Qingyuan Empire, he was definitely not far from that. For the benefactor he spoke of to resolve a poison that even Elder Qi was unable to resolve, wasn't that benefactor a little too formidable? Compared to him, I'm nothing more like an ant before a divine dragon. I'm nowhere on par with him. Even though my benefactor's cultivation realm is a little low, his medical skills have reached a level far beyond my imagination. Upon speaking of his benefactor, admiration crept into Elder Qi's eyes. In the field of the way of medicine, he had never truly admired or respected anyone, but that young man who had saved his life. He viewed the other party with the utmost reverence. Hearing that Elder Qi was full of praise for that man, Hall Master Xing couldn't help but ask, "May I know who he is?" "He goes by the name of Sun Qiong, but I have no idea where he came from and where he is at the moment," Elder Qi said with a hint of lamentation in his voice. He turned to Hall Master Xing and continued, "You have wider connections than me. If there's a chance, help me look out for this man. If I manage to meet him again, I must make sure to express my gratitude to him formally." Halfway through Elder Qi's words, Hall Master Xing's eyes had widened to the brim. Perplexed, Elder Qi asked, "What's wrong?" "A master teacher just came to our combat master hall earlier today, and he goes by the name of Sun Qiong as well. And, if I recall correctly, he claimed to be a physician at one point in time too. See, could it be that they are both the same person?" Hall Master Xing asked. Previously, when Sun Qiong offered to use poison to resolve his trauma, the other party had said that he was a physician. Could there really be such a huge coincidence? Were they really the same person? His name is Sun Qiong, too? What does he look like? Elder Qi asked in agitation. If Zhong Xian were there, he surely would have been able to recognize Elder Qi as the eccentric old man whom he had saved back at Jingyuan City. Back then, after his poison was resolved, he had managed to return to the primordial spirit realm in an instant. Over the past 2 months, by reinforcing his cultivation further, he had managed to achieve another breakthrough, reaching half-leaving aperture realm. The most important factor that determined whether one was able to advance from primordial spirit to half-leaving aperture realm was the resilience of their soul. The 20 years of suffering that Elder Qi had undergone had instead become the impetus to his rapid breakthrough once his condition was resolved. "He looks like a young man in his early 20s. Hall Master Xing rattled off a description. "That isn't right. The Sun Qiong I know of looks to be in his 40s. However, there are many experts who are capable of altering their looks, so we can't judge it just based on his appearance in itself. It would be better if I can meet the other party personally." "All right, bring me over to take a look." Hearing that his benefactor could very well be in the Combat Master Hall, Elder Qi could not hold back his agitation any longer. "All right." Hall Master Xing nodded, and he swiftly brought Elder Qi back to the Combat Master Hall. The trial in the Inner Breath Division is actually just a simple assessment of the challenger's quantity of zhenqi. There is a powerful formation set up in the trial of Inner Breath that can gauge the amount of zhenqi that one harnesses, and the greater the number is, the more zhenqi one wields. As long as you can achieve a score of 10 or more, you will be qualified to enter the library to browse through the books you want. Division Head Wei summarized the trial as they made their way over to the Inner Breath Division. Zhong Xian nodded in response. While the both of them were speaking, they finally arrived at the Inner Breath Division. It was a grand and splendid building, just like the Heart Division. There were huge crowds of combat masters walking in and out. Actually, with Sun Shi's strength, there is no need for you to take the trial at all. I can just bring you into the library directly, Division Head Wei stated with a smile. Given how the young man before him was able to dodge a collaborative offense from the three of them despite possessing just a cultivation of Saint Wundan Pinnacle, there was no doubt that he would be able to overcome the trial of Inner Breath with ease. To be honest with you, I have been cultivating diligently over the past month, but I haven't had a chance to assess the current level of my strength yet. If it isn't too much hassle, I would like to take the trial of Inner Breath to see how much I am lacking compared to the combat masters, Zhong Xian replied. Of course, Zhong Xian had no doubt that he would be able to clear the trial of Inner Breath with ease. However, this was a good opportunity not only to assess his own strength but that of the combat masters as well. With some understanding of the combat master's standard level of strength, he would be able to prepare the members of the Shenxian faction accordingly for the exchange later on. Otherwise, without the slightest understanding of the combat master's strength, they would be at a major disadvantage for the exchange. On the way there, he had already sent information on the vitreous heart-tempering sutra to Wang Ying and the others. He had simplified the secret art considerably, so even without him deciphering it for them, they would still be able to comprehend and cultivate it easily. Lacking. On the other hand, Division Head Wei shook his head after hearing Zhong Shen's words. The ones who were lacking were their combat masters instead. Of course, he did not tell him that. Instead, he continued leading Zhong Shen forward, and before long, they were already standing before a passageway. Unlike the trial of inner demons, where there was scarcely a person to be seen at the entrance of trial of inner breaths was surrounded by combat masters. There were quite a few of them whose cultivation had reached Saint Wundan pinnacle as well, and they were intending to undergo the trial to gain access to their Saint Tudan cultivation technique manuals. Upon seeing that Division Head Wei had arrived, the crowd quickly opened up a path for him to walk through. At the same time, they could not help but direct perplexed gazes at Zhong Shen. For a Saint Wundan fellow to be escorted here personally by their division head, just what was his identity? Ignoring the perplexed gazes directed at him, Division Head Wei asked, "Who's in there?" The passageway into the trial of inner breaths was currently closed, a sign that someone was currently challenging the trial inside. Reporting to Division Head Wei, "Shahao is inside," reported one of the combat masters amid the crowd. "Shahao." Division Head Wei's eyes lit up. That fellow is finally willing to challenge the trial and push for a breakthrough. Knowing that Zhong Shen would be confused about what they were speaking of, he quickly explained, "Sun Shi, Shahao has been the champion for an internal competition we hold annually in the Saint Wundan tier for several consecutive years. Just by his strength alone, he has already surpassed the fighting prowess of ordinary 1,000-men commanders. The zhenqi that he harnesses has also reached a frightening level, such that most Saint Tudan combat masters would struggle to match him. He reached Saint Wundan pinnacle 20 years ago, but in order to challenge his limits, he has been suppressing his cultivation all this while, reinforcing his cultivation again and again. However, if he has decided to drop by the trial of inner breaths, he's probably ready to push for a breakthrough to Saint Tudan now." Chapter 11:22. Trial of Inner Breath. He reached Saint Wundan pinnacle 20 years ago. Zhong Shen was astonished. Those who were able to enter the Combat Master Hall were all the most talented of geniuses. For such an individual to suppress his cultivation for 20 whole years and not achieve a breakthrough, his cultivation must have been reinforced to an unbelievable level. Hearing the sudden exclamation, a combat master turned to Zhong Shen with a peculiar gaze and explained, "The reason Shahao held himself back from making a breakthrough is to break the existing record of the trial of inner breath. The current record of the trial of inner breath was 37 points, made by combat master Feng Moxiao 300 years ago. Breaking his record won't be easy at all," Division Head Wei said with a frown. For ordinary combat masters, they were considered to have achieved the apex of their cultivation realm just by achieving a score of 10 points. Achieving a score of 37 meant that in terms of quantity of zhenqi, combat master Feng Moxiao had 3.7 times that of ordinary combat masters. That accomplishment in itself was inconceivable. It was for this reason that the record had remained unbroken over the past 300 years. It was all for the sake of overcoming that record that Shahao had held himself back for 20 years, reinforcing his cultivation again and again, in hopes that he would be able to leave his name behind for future generations to look up to and admire. Even though Division Head Wei had high expectations of Shahao, he still thought that it would be extremely difficult for the latter to break that record. The odds were not in Shahao's favor. It might have been difficult in the past, but over the past half a year, he has been cultivating frenziedly, killing saint beasts, and gathering saint-tier medicinal herbs to nourish his meridians and dantian, replied with Combat Master grimly. According to the rumors, it seems like he has even delved underground and bathed himself in lava for the sake of refining his zhenqi. Honestly speaking, even I can't imagine how far his strength must have grown over the past half a year. At the very least, I don't think that he will be too far away from matching up to Combat Master Feng Moxiao. If it had been half a year ago, No one would have believed that Shahao could clear the record. However, after seeing how far Shahao had gone to raise his abilities over the past half a year, he might just be able to break that record. Division Head Wei was stunned for a moment before he shook his head. That fellow sure is tenacious. I didn't think that he would really cultivate that technique. That technique? Zhong Xian asked curiously. I'm referring to a particularly profound cultivation technique of the inner breath division known as the art of drawing oceans. It's said that once one masters that technique, the zhenqi within one's body will become endless, as if drawing strength from the boundless ocean. This is also the technique that Combat Master Feng cultivated back when he made the record. It seems like that lad is really determined to leave his mark here this time around, Division Head Wei said. While the duo was speaking, the wall in front of the passageway suddenly lit up. Look, the trial is starting, someone among the crowd shouted, and everyone quickly turned their gazes over. Hula! As the light lit up, a string of numbers suddenly materialized on the wall, and it began leaping up swiftly. It did not take long before it came to a halt. 38. He really broke Combat Master Feng's record. Upon seeing those words, everyone was stunned for an instant. Even Division Head Wei had frozen on the spot. For an entire 300 years, Combat Master Feng's score had remained an unsurpassable record for those who came after him, and no one had thought it was possible to outdo him either. Who could have known that they would actually witness the birth of a legend today? He really didn't disappoint me. It looks like the effort that I spent on him hasn't gone to waste. Division Head Wei laughed heartily. He had seen potential in Shahao, and he had spent quite some time grooming him over the past few years. It seemed like he had really uncovered a gem this time around. The door to the passageway slowly opened, and a young man walked out with a slightly pale face. Division Head Wei. Shahao hurriedly clasped his fist and bowed upon seeing Division Head Wei. Even though it looked like he had overexerted himself back inside, his back was still upright like a spear. Yuan. You have done well. Division Head Wei complimented. Thank you for guiding me over the past few years. Shahao relied with an excited gleam in his eyes. The breaking of the record had also given him a great injection of confidence. It was a reassurance to him that he was walking down the right path. A score of 38 means that Shahao has displayed a might 3.8 times of an ordinary combat master's. Is it even possible to top that record? I think that his record should remain safe up there for at least the next 300 years. To maintain a record for several hundred years. Impressive. An excited commotion broke out in the surroundings. Watching a record being made before their eyes had left the others imagining themselves being in Shahao's place, and that had sparked their drive to cultivate as well. Sunsure, you should go in and have a try, too. Seeing that Shahao had broken the previous record right before Sunsure, Division Head Wei could not help but feel a little gleeful. In response to Division Head Wei's words, Zhong Xian nodded before heading in. Seeing the young man beside Division Head Wei entering the trial of inner breath, Shahao couldn't help but ask, Division Head Wei, Sunsure is. In the first place, it was perplexing for someone as esteemed as Division Head Wei to be escorting someone around. Furthermore, Shahao knew all of the Saint Wandan pinnacle combat masters in Qingyuan Empire, but the young man's face didn't ring a bell. Noticing Shahao's doubts, Division Head Wei explained, Sunsure isn't a combat master but a spirit awakener. He has done our hall master a great favor, so make sure to treat him courteously. He said that he is interested in testing his strength, so I brought him here to give it a try. A spirit awakener wants to try out our trial of inner breaths. What a joke! Shahao sneered disdainfully. He had thought that the other party would be some formidable expert, but who would have thought that he was a mere spirit awakener? Spirit awakener was only a supporting occupation, and their fighting prowess was known to be rather unimpressive. For a spirit awakener to challenge the trial of their combat master hall, wasn't that a joke in itself? Not only did Shahao react in such a manner, the others also shook their heads as well. Spirit awakeners were simply way too weak. Sunsure might have helped their hall master in some way, but still, he was being too arrogant for thinking that he was worthy of challenging their trial as a spirit awakener. Seeing that Shahao had blatantly ignored his reminder, Division Head Wei frowned in displeasure. However, seeing that Sun Sha was not around, he decided to allow it to slide this once. Don't underestimate Sun Sha. In terms of fighting prowess, he is likely to be above all of you here. He had seen Sun Sha in action, and the other party's reflexes and sense of timing were at a monstrous level. However, given that they had not truly crossed blows with one another previously, he could not tell for sure how much zhenqi Sun Sha wielded. Thus, he could not really gauge how well the other party would fare in this trial. Nevertheless, a person who possessed such frightening combat senses should not fare too badly in terms of zhenqi. Shi Hao was initially astonished by Division Head Wei's high appraisal of Sun Sha. However, recalling the amazing feat that he had just achieved, he held his chest up high confidently and replied, "His fighting prowess may be above mine, but in terms of zhenqi quantity, there is no one who can possibly outdo me. As one of the greatest geniuses of the Inner Breath Division in the past 300 years, it was natural that his confidence would not waver with just this much." "The trial is beginning," someone shouted once more, and everyone quickly turned their head. They were interested to see how the man who was so highly regarded by their division head would fare in the trial. Wang. A burst of light emerged from the wall, but unlike the situation with Shi Hao previously, no number surfaced. "There are no numbers at all? It can't be that fellow didn't even succeed in shattering the first stone wall? One has to shatter the first wall in order to claim the 10 points required to clear the examination. If one fails to shatter the wall, no results will be reflected. I thought that he would wow all of us here like Shi Hao, but it seems like he's just a mere mortal after all." Seeing that there were no numbers surfacing on the wall in front of the passageway, everyone shook their head in disappointment. On the other hand, Division Head Wei could not help but feel a little bewildered. Judging from how Sun Sha had performed in the previous battle, it should not have been too difficult for him to earn 10 points. So, how could there be no results whatsoever? Had the test not started yet? But that could not be. The burst of light was indicative that the test had already started, so how could there be no result? Jia. Just as Division Head Wei was still pondering over the bewildering situation, the door to the passageway suddenly creaked. Someone was coming out. It went without saying that the departure of the challenger meant that the trial had already ended. If the challenger had met the fundamental requirement, a score would have already appeared by now. The fact that there was no score meant that, just as what the others had said, Sun Sha had failed to break even the first wall. Division Head Wei sighed. It seems that, despite Sun Sha's amazing reflexes, he's still a little lacking in terms of his zhenqi. Having strong fighting prowess only meant that one was able to utilize one's strength efficiently and effectively, and that might not necessarily be directly correlated with one's zhenqi quantity. And the trial of Inner Breath only assessed one's zhenqi quantity. To put it simply, it was just like the difference between sprinting and running a marathon. Even if an individual could utilize their strength effectively and sprint at a speed far beyond the others, that did not mean that they would necessarily be good at a marathon. Sun Sha was probably the type of cultivator who had extremely powerful burst power, allowing him to overwhelm his enemy swiftly. However, if the battle was not concluded quickly, he might lack the endurance to follow through. While Division Head Wei was contemplating over this matter, Zhongxian finally walked out of the room with a sheepish look on his face. Division Head Wei thought that Zhongxian was feeling sheepish due to his poor results in the trial, so he quickly stepped forward to alleviate the awkwardness in the air. "Don't worry about the results. Come, let me bring you to the library. Those walls." Zhongxian pointed into the trial of Inner Breath and spoke hesitantly. "Don't worry, it's fine. You aren't a combat master, so you need not feel pressured by the matter." Division Head Wei patted Zhongxian's shoulder and smiled. The other party was only a spirit awakener, not a combat master. Considering their differing fields of specialty, it would be unfair to hold him to the same standards. But Zhongxian was visibly a little distressed by the situation. "It's just a simple trial, it's no big deal at all," Division Head Wei added. "No big deal at all?" A light flickered across Zhongxian's eyes, and he turned to Division Head Wei and asked, "Does the formation automatically repair itself?" Yes, that's right. The formation will automatically repair any damage to the walls inside, so there's no need to worry about that. Division Head Wei replied amiably. That's good. Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief, and the conflicted expression on his face finally vanished, replaced with a smile. All right, let's head to the library then. Division Head Wei nodded before leading the way. The library of the Inner Breath Division was located relatively close to the trial. With a wave of his hand, a passageway opened in the formation surrounding the library, and the both of them proceeded in. I thought that he would be some formidable expert, but to think that he couldn't even break the first wall. Well, he's just a spirit awakener. Do you honestly expect a spirit awakener to be able to clear the trials of our Combat Master Hall? I figure that he's probably a scion from some prestigious clan here for a tour. With strength like that, I could easily defeat 3 of him simultaneously, so how could he possibly be of any help to our Hall Master? After seeing the duo enter the library, a huge commotion immediately broke out among the combat masters. They had to clear the trial before they could assess the library to pick out their cultivation technique. On the other hand, the Spirit Awakener did not even clear the trial, and yet, Division Head Wei still escorted him there. The clear disparity in their treatment left them a little dissatisfied. All right, let's not waste our breath on that fellow. He isn't a combat master, so how can we hold him to our standards? Interrupting the discussions of the crowd, Shahao turned to another combat master and said, speaking of which, Xiaobo, didn't you have a bet with me previously to see who will be able to leave our mark in the trial of Inner Breath? I am done with the trial, so it should be your turn now. Let's see if you can beat my record. With the gazes of the crowd on him, the face of the combat master named Xiaobo reddened. There's no way that I will be able to clear your record, but a score of 20 or so should still be a walk in the park. You achieved a score of 21 previously, right? All right, I won't bully you then. As long as you can achieve a score exceeding 23, I'll consider it your victory. Naturally, the stakes that we agreed on previously still count. Shahao chuckled. Xiaobo pondered for a moment before nodding. All right then. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door and walked into the passageway. However, before his entire body could step through the door, he suddenly halted. As if having seen a ghost, his body trembled uncontrollably. How is this PPP possible? A high-pitched scream echoed from the passageway. Everyone was bewildered by Xiaobo's sudden scream. Shahao rushed forward and asked, "What's wrong?" While speaking those words, he also peered through the ajar door. His eyes immediately narrowed, and his face paled. He could not help but retreat backward, and his body stiffened. Chapter 1123. A score of 100. Seeing the 2 experts of the Combat Master Hall reacting in such a bewildering fashion, the crowd frowned. They quickly gathered around the door to take a look. Gia. The door to the passageway was pushed open entirely, and the sight inside came into plain view. This. All of the combat masters instinctively drew in sharp gasps, and their eyes widened in horror. After a long moment of silence, Xiaobo gulped and spoke hoarsely. Shahao, when you came out previously, are you certain that the trial reverted back to normal? Yuan. When I left, the trial had definitely reverted back to normal. It must be him. There's no one else, it must be him. Shahao replied in agitation. Despite being labeled as a trial, the trial of Inner Breath was actually rather simple. The challenger only had to stand at a specified location and exert their zhenqi to destroy the stone walls located several dozen meters away. These stone walls were conjured by the formation, and they were particularly resistant to zhenqi. Without a sufficiently large reserve of zhenqi, it would be impossible to puncture a hole through it. Under normal circumstances, a 10-man commander would have to use his full strength just to break the first wall. The fact that Shahao had received 8 points meant that he had nearly broken through the 4th wall before his zhenqi was depleted. Without a doubt, this achievement should have made him the #1 Saint Wandan pinnacle expert of the Qingyuan Empire Combat Master Hall since its founding. But right before his eyes, all 10 stone walls had been shattered into fragments. The trial of Inner Breath had been reduced to little more than a rubbish dump. Did he intentionally destroy our trial? Asked one of the combat masters. The trial of Inner Breath was one of the most important facilities of their Combat Master Hall. To reduce it to such a state, wasn't that a little too much? That isn't it. Xiao Bo walked into the wrecked room and stopped right before the first stone wall. His eyes narrowed in disbelief as he explained, the formation in the trial was created by an 8-star formation master sent by the headquarters. With his Saint One Dan pinnacle cultivation, he wouldn't be able to cause damage even if he wanted to. Given that this was a location for a cultivator to test the amount of junqi they had, it was natural that it was built to be able to withstand a great deal of damage. Even with a combat master exerting their full might, it wouldn't even leave a scratch in the area. Given so, it was impossible to intentionally destroy it. Then how? The combat master who had spoken earlier asked. This was caused by a single palm strike. The one who spoke was Shahao this time around. There was a grim look in his narrowed eyes. A single palm strike? Everyone was perplexed by those words. In other words, he challenged the trial as anyone else would, but, due to the overwhelming junqi that he harnesses, the 10 stone walls were destroyed in an instant. At the same time, the formation was unable to withstand the violent might he exerted, thus resulting in the ruination that we see, Shahao explained. His strength exceeded the tolerance of the formation. He destroyed 10 stone walls simultaneously. Everyone gulped down a mouthful of saliva. This news was simply too shocking. It was at a level far beyond their imagination. Shahao is right. Look at those broken stone walls. I believe that you should notice something peculiar about them, too. Xiao Bo nodded as he pointed to the fragmented walls before him. Everyone quickly rushed into the room to get a closer look, and before long, their eyes were widened in shock. On the first wall face, there was a clean palm print smashed into it. As if a wrecking ball, the palm print had crushed through it with great ease. Xiao Bo nodded. This is just the first stone wall. Look at the others, and you should understand why Shahao said that. The others quickly turned their gazes over. There were palm prints on the other 9 faces as well, and they were identical in size. If one were to line them up, one would realize that they were connected by a straight line. In other words, all 10 of the stone walls were shattered simultaneously by just a single move. Shahao could already be known as the greatest genius of the inner breath division in the past several millenniums, and yet, he had only achieved a score of 3.8 points, not being able to break even the 4th wall before he ran out of junqi. And yet, that fellow actually broke through all 10 walls in a single palm strike, and even the formation couldn't withstand his might. How in the world did he do it? I just said a moment ago that no one will break Combat Master Shi's record for the next 300 years. I was also thinking the same as you, but who could have known that, in just 2 short minutes, someone would have already outdone him? And as if to rub salt to his wounds, it was done so overwhelmingly, fully displaying the vast contrast in their strength. Everyone's body were shaking wildly. They had just mocked the other party for being so arrogant to challenge their trial despite only being a spirit awakener, but who could have known that a single palm strike from the other party was more than sufficient to devastate their trial? How could a Saint One Dan cultivator have so much junqi? In any case, there's no way this can be true. Say, is it possible that he might have used some kind of formidable artifact? Asked one of the combat masters among the crowd. As combat masters, they were geniuses among geniuses, but even clearing the trial of inner breath posed a great difficulty for them. So how could the fellow achieve such an inconceivable feat? Artifact. You are really overthinking this one. Look over there. Shahao shook his head and pointed in a certain direction. Frowning, the combat master turned his gaze over, and what he saw left his body shivering in shock. On the wall, a string of numbers could be clearly seen, 100. Since the result was reflected on the wall outside, it went without saying that it would be reflected within as well so that the challenger would know how well they had performed. The formation had the ability to detect whether artifacts had been used or not, and once the presence of an artifact was detected, the results would automatically be voided. 100. The combat master felt the back of his throat running dry. If he achieved a score, why isn't it reflected outside? The other combat masters also turned their gazes over. Indeed, if there was a score reflected within, why wasn't it reflected on the wall outside? It did not make sense. It was precisely because there was nothing outside that they had thought that the Spirit Awakener had failed the trial in the first place. Most likely, the formation was destroyed before it could transmit the result to the wall outside, Shahao said with a bitter smile. Taking another look at the devastated surroundings, the crowd came to a realization. Still, to be able to destroy all 10 of the stone tablets with a single palm strike, just how much Zhenqi does that Sunsha possess? Hearing that question, the combat masters couldn't help but fall silent. Upon entering the library, Division Head Wei gestured to the shelves of books and said, "This is our library. Its scale is nowhere up to par to the Master-Teacher Pavilion, but our cultivation techniques are all top-notch. There won't be any problem cultivating them. Most of the books in the Master-Teacher Pavilion were created by many different generations of Master Teachers. As a result, there were many books that contradicted one another, making it difficult to determine the truth from the false. If one were to read aimlessly, one would just serve to confuse themselves. It was for this reason that it was a huge taboo for a master teacher to randomly browse through books. Without direction, the more one read, the more confused one would be. Eventually, it would erode one's state of mind and result in the birth of inner demons, thus causing one's cultivation to stagnate or even go berserk. However, the libraries of the Combat Master Hall were different. Most of the cultivation technique manuals on their shelves had been practiced by preceding combat masters, and they were proven to be practical time and time again. Otherwise, they would either be further refined or eliminated altogether. No matter which book one picked off the shelves, it was bound to be a formidable cultivation technique that would allow one to advance one's cultivation swiftly. Zhongxian nodded before heading forward to take a look. Soon, however, he could not help but feel a little disappointed. Just as the other party had said, there were indeed not many cultivation technique manuals on the shelves. All in all, they only numbered several hundred. But while they did not have many cultivation technique manuals, they did have a bunch of introductory manuals filled with the insights of the predecessors. There were around several 100,000 of those altogether. Those shelves over there contain the insights of preceding combat masters. However, due to the unique constitution of each cultivator, the path that each individual takes is bound to differ from anyone else's. Thus, you should keep this in mind while browsing those books. If you simply read through them aimlessly, you might risk confusing yourself. Division Head Wei explained. These books over here are the insights left behind by Hall Master Xing. If you must, it'd be better to study his. This way, if you have any questions, you could at least clarify them with him. Zhongxian nodded before turning his gaze back to the hundreds of cultivation technique manuals. Those insights meant very little to him. What was more important were the cultivation techniques themselves. Voila! With a quick glance, he collected all of those books into the Library of Heaven's Path. Compile, Zhongxian muttered softly. In the blink of an eye, a brand new book appeared. Placing his finger on it, the knowledge contained within it flowed into his mind. Not too bad, I managed to compile a complete cultivation technique from those books. Zhongxian frowned. However, there are still 3 flaws in it. Even though there were several hundred books, due to their concise and profound content, Zhongxian was still able to successfully form a Saint Tu Dan cultivation technique. However, there were 3 flaws with it. Zhongxian shook his head. There are still too many flaws for me to cultivate it. Never mind, I should take in all of the other cultivation technique manuals first. It was one thing for his battle technique to be flawed, but for his cultivation technique. All along, he had only practiced the flawless Heaven's Path divine art. The only flawed cultivation technique that he had practiced was the Saint Ascension Decipher, but even so, he had made up for those flaws by using artifacts as catalysts. Thus, it was unacceptable for him to cultivate such a flawed Saint Tu Dan cultivation technique. It seemed like he would have to find some way to gather more Saint Tu Dan cultivation techniques to remove those flaws. Zhongxian turned his gaze to the insights, and after sweeping through them, he realized that they did little to remove the flaws in the Saint Tu Dan cultivation technique. Thus, he decided not to collect them anymore. Zhongxian turned to Division Head Wei and asked, "Are there any Saint 3 Dan cultivation techniques here?" Saint 3 Dan cultivation techniques? We do have some of them here. Follow me. Given how Division Head Wei was at Primordial Spirit Realm Pinnacle, it went without saying that the Combat Master Hall had Saint 3 Dan and Saint 4 Dan cultivation techniques. Soon, they arrived at the area where the Saint 3 Dan cultivation technique manuals were stored. Just as he had guessed earlier, there were even fewer of them around. It took just an instant for him to collect all of them into his library of Heaven's Path, and after taking a look at it, he could not help but feel even more disappointed. He did not even manage to successfully compile a Saint 3 Dan cultivation technique. Under Division Head Wei's lead, he collected the Saint 4 Dan cultivation techniques too, but he could not compile a cultivation technique either. Seeing how the young man had been walking around the library without picking up any book at all, Division Head Wei couldn't help but ask, "Sunsha, may I ask exactly what kind of book you are looking for? Perhaps I may be able to assist you in searching for it. I'm not too sure either, but it doesn't seem like there's anything suitable for me here." Zhongxian shook his head. After a moment of hesitation, he continued. "Right, do you have any other Saint 2 Dan cultivation technique manuals? Their tier doesn't matter, I need as many of them as possible." To him, the tier of the cultivation technique truly did not make much of a difference at all. As long as the number was sufficient, he would be able to compile a Heaven's Path divine art. Well, it was true that high-tier cultivation techniques had fewer flaws, so he needed less of them to compile a Heaven's Path divine art, but the problem with that was that they were rare and hard to obtain. I'm afraid that there are not any more in our Inner Breath division. However, Division Head Feng of the Martial Arts Division might have some. He was originally from the Master Teacher Pavilion, and he has a huge collection of battle technique and cultivation technique manuals. In the Combat Master Hall, he's the one who is the most likely to fulfill your needs. Division Head Wei replied. "Oh, may I trouble you to take me to the Martial Arts Division to take a look then?" Zhongxian asked. "That isn't a problem." Smiling, Division Head Wei led Zhongxian out of the library. However, upon reaching the entrance, his eyelids suddenly began twitching. Chapter 1124, Too long. A huge crowd of combat masters were standing right outside the library. Shahao and Xiao Bo from before were among them as well. "What are you all up to?" The huge crowd gathered had eyes that were either reddened from agitation or anger. However, regardless of what it was clear that they were up to something. Thus, Division Head Wei frowned in displeasure and said, "Sunsha isn't from the Combat Master Hall, so he need not obey our rules to enter the library." Division Head Wei, "We aren't here for the matter." Noting that Division Head Wei had misunderstood their intentions, Shahao quickly spoke up and explained, "There's a matter that we hope for you look into." The happenings in the trial of Inner Breath were simply too shocking that they feared that the other party would not believe them if they were to just speak of it. It was better to bring the other party over to have a look for himself. Noticing the grim looks on their faces, Division Head Wei asked, "What happened?" Division Head Wei, "This way please. You will understand once you see it," Huang Bo said as he politely gestured the way forward. "All right then." Seeing that they were not willing to speak of it, Division Head Wei thought that it might be a matter that was confidential to the Inner Breath Division. Thus, he turned to Zhongxian and said, "Pardon me, but I will have to trouble Sun She to wait here for a moment." "Don't worry, it's no problem at all." Zhongxian nodded. It was apparent that the other party had some private matters to attend to, so it was not convenient for him to tag along. With an apologetic look, Division Head Wei quickly followed Xiaobo out. After he left, Zhongxian shook his head. Just as he was about to close his eyes and make use of this opportunity to look through the books that he had just collected, the combat master named Shahao suddenly walked up to him. "My name is Shahao, and I wish to have a spar with Sun She." Considering how the other party had smashed through all 10 of the stone walls in the Inner Breath Division, the sheer amount of zhenqi the other party possessed was bound to be countless times greater than his. He had never met a peer who exceeded him by so much before, and this had truly piqued his curiosity and fighting will. At the same time, he also wanted to see if the other party had truly used his own strength to achieve such an astounding score in the trial of Inner Breath. "You want to have a spar with me?" "That's right." Shahao clasped his fist. "I hope that Sun She can agree to my request." Noting the earnest look in the other party's eyes, Zhongxian relented. All right then, all along, other than Feng Zun, he had never crossed blows with any combat masters before. This would be a good opportunity for him to assess their strength too. Pardon me. Taking a deep breath, Shahao's chest puffed up. At the same time, his aura surged immensely, and as if a dagger drawn from his sheath, a chilling air burst into the surroundings. Hoo-la! He sprinted forward swiftly with powerful footsteps. Even before he reached Zhongxian, he had already whipped up a strong gale in the surroundings, leaving one feeling as if a behemoth was standing before them. Sheer power could crush all techniques. The amount of zhenqi that ran through Shahao's body was so great that he did not even need to resort to any battle techniques when facing ordinary cultivators. All he had to do was to overwhelm them with the sheer amount of his zhenqi. He was planning to do the same this time around too. His zhenqi gushed out as if water bursting out from a dam. Before such power, ordinary cultivators would find themselves completely bogged down by the intense concentration of zhenqi, leaving them incapable of retaliating or even escaping. Art of drawing oceans. Against the boundless mass of the ocean, it was impossible to withstand or avoid it. Not bad. Feeling the other party's strength, Zhongxian's eyes lit up. If he had not cultivated the Saint Ascension decipher, the other party's zhenqi would probably have been on par with his. To gain the same quantity of zhenqi as him, who had practiced the Heaven's Path divine art, through just an ordinary cultivation technique, the combat master named Shahao was indeed a formidable figure. It was no wonder he was able to break the existing record and claim first place for himself. Make your move. While Zhongxian was still deep in thought, Shahao bellowed loudly as he raised his palm and struck at him. It was not a particularly powerful battle technique, just the most basic great palm strike. But as simple as the technique was, the might it harnessed when complemented with Shahao's overwhelming zhenqi was frightening. It felt as if the technique would rip a hole even in space itself. The surrounding air currents raged under the furious strength of his great palm strike, and the rumbling of thunder echoed in the surroundings. The frightening amount of zhenqi formed a huge flood that threatened to crush everything in its path. Without dodging, Zhongxian simply smiled lightly as he shot a finger forward. Voila! The ferocious wave stopped right before his fingertip, unable to advance a single inch forward. As if a snake grabbed 7 inches from its head, no matter how the wave raged, it found itself rendered completely helpless by the finger before it. Scram! Seeing how the other party had stopped his strongest attack with just a single finger, Shahao's face flushed red. With a furious roar, he drove his strength to its very maximum, to the point where his meridians were beginning to tear from the immense pressure from the zhenqi racing through them. Noting the veins bulging from Shahao's head, Zhongxian shook his head. He bent his finger back slightly before flicking it forward forcefully. Pang! The massive wave vanished, and the rampaging zhenqi scattered into the surroundings. Deng 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 deng! Shahao was forced to retreat 8 steps, and his face turned scarlet from the impact. Shahao swiftly took 2 breaths in order to calm his state, and to his astonishment, he realized that he had emerged from the short but deadly encounter with no injuries at all. In that instant, his face reddened in shame, and he quickly stepped forward and clasped his fist. Sunsha, thank you for going easy on me. He had attacked with his full strength. Any ordinary cultivator would have suffered severe injuries in an instant. Yet, putting aside how the other party managed to subdue his attack with a single finger, he even controlled his strength so precisely that the damage he would suffer as a result of the collision of strength would be reduced to the bare minimum. It was one thing to wield great power, but to be able to control it to such a precise extent as well. Terrifying. Your fighting prowess isn't too bad, Zhongxian complimented. He did mean those words. In terms of quantity of zhenqi, the other party was just slightly beneath Wang Ying, Liu Yang, and his other direct disciples. If he fought against the members of the Shenxian faction, it was likely that the latter would not be a match for him. It seemed like he would have to instruct those of the Shenxian faction not to face this combat master Shahao in a direct clash of zhenqi, or else they would surely suffer tragic losses. Thank you. Shahao thanked Zhongxian, but he couldn't completely conceal the bitterness on his face. He was the individual who boasted the greatest amount of zhenqi among all Saint One Dan cultivators ever since the founding of the Qingyuan Empire Combat Master Hall, but yet, in the other party's eyes, he could only qualify as not bad. However, the other party did have the right to say so. Shi Hao hesitated for a moment before saying, "I was unwilling to believe it at first, but it seems like you have really cleared the trial of inner breath with your own strength. If it's not too much, there's one question I would like to ask you. Feel free to speak. To destroy all 10 of the stone walls in a single palm. May I know how much zhenqi you expended in that single blow?" Shi Hao asked. Even after depleting the very last bit of his zhenqi, he had only managed to shatter 3 walls. The fact that the other party had destroyed everything within a single palm strike meant that he did not use his full strength in the first place. The truth might very well frighten him, but even so, he still wanted to know how much strength the other party used to shatter the 10 stone walls. He would then use that as a gauge and aim to surpass the other party in the future. The few combat masters who had remained in the area to spectate the fight also quickly turned their gazes over. They were intrigued by this matter as well. When Shi Hao emerged from the passageway, his face had been ghastly pale, and he had looked as if he would fall at any moment. It had taken him several pills and a long moment of recuperation before he had been able to heal up sufficiently to use the ultimate technique that he had just executed. On the other hand, Sun Shi had walked out of the passageway with a healthy red glow on his face, such that it almost seemed like he had just attended a feast instead of undergoing a trial. After that, he still had the strength to visit the library and browse through books. It would be understandable if he had not cleared the trial, but the problem was that he had done so with full marks. So, just how much zhenqi could he have? How much zhenqi did I expend? Zhong Xian did not really expect the other party to ask such a question. Scratching his head, he pondered for a moment before replying, "I wasn't pay much attention to it, but I should have recovered fully by the time I entered the library. Thank you for your concern." "Recovered fully by the time you entered the library? Thank you for my concern." Shi Hao choked on his saliva, and he nearly passed out on the spot. "Who the heck is worried about you? What I want to know is how powerful you are. But, you actually recovered by the time you entered the library? Doesn't that mean that the amount of zhenqi you expended in the trial of inner breath is insignificant to you?" This realization left Shi Hao's face paling, and he suddenly felt an excruciating ache in his heart. For 20 years, he had held himself back from making a breakthrough, all for the sake of breaking a record and creating a legend for the future generations. He did manage to break the record, but it did not last for even 2 minutes before it was callously smashed by another person. To make things worse, the other party did not even think that it was anything much. He had thought that, at the very most, he would just have to work diligently for another 20 years to overcome the other party. However, judging from the current situation, even 200 years would not be sufficient for him to reach the other party's level. The gap between them was simply too huge, too huge. In an instant, Shi Hao felt so traumatized that he seemed to be withering on the spot. Only he himself knew how much suffering he had gone through over the past 20 years for the single goal of breaking the record. Many times, he had thought of giving up and just achieving a breakthrough on the spot, but upon thinking of that single goal he had gritted his teeth and persevered. However, the goal that he had striven for all this time turned out to be nothing in the other party's eyes. The more he thought about it, the more he felt like spewing blood. Shi Hao gritted his teeth and asked once more, then, "May I know how long Sun Shi has been in Saint One Dan to accumulate such astounding reserves of zhenqi?" Even though the other party looked to be in his early 20s on the surface, there were several powerful clans who had secret arts that allowed them to conceal their age. Take him for example, he was already in his 200s this year, but in the eyes of others, he only appeared to be in his late 30s. If the other party had spent more than 20 years at St. Wondan Pinnacle, at the very least, he could console himself that the time he had spent was not in vain, and he could pick up some of his shattered fragments of confidence. However, upon hearing Shi Hao's words, Zhong Xian could not help but sigh deeply in lamentation. "It's a huge regret, but I have spent much longer than I thought I would in this realm." As he was unable to find the Saint Two Dan Heaven's Path divine art, he had ended up being stuck in Saint One Dan for much longer than he would have liked. Just the thought of it left his face reddening in shame. This was like a dark stain on his record. You have spent much longer than you thought you would in this realm? Shahao heaved a sigh of relief. Given that the other party had also spent a long time in the realm in order to achieve such strength, it seemed like the talent he had did not pale too much in comparison to the other party after all. Indeed. I simply have not been able to find a suitable cultivation technique to achieve a breakthrough. That's also why I paid a visit to your library in hopes that I might find some inspiration for me to overcome my bottleneck. Zhongxian sighed once more and shook his head regretfully. After all, I have already been in this realm for more than a month. If I don't achieve a breakthrough soon, I won't have any face to stand before my students anymore. Shihao clutched his chest tightly. The other combat masters. Chapter 1125. Teacher, thank you for your guidance. Shihao had spent a whole 20 years at St. Wundan Pinnacle before being able to gather that much power. He had thought that the other party would have been in St. Wundan for decades at the very minimum, since he was lamenting over the long period of time he had been in the realm, but who would have thought? A month. A month. Long your head. To reinforce your cultivation to such an extent within such a short period of time, and you still say that you've spent a long time in the realm. Will you die if you stop boasting? Shihao felt the pain in his heart intensifying even further. The others also had the same expressions on their faces. If only they were strong enough, they would have rushed forward to give him a good pummeling. That fellow was truly asking for it. To grumble about a month being too long, and even complaining that he would be unable to face his students. With such speed, are you sure you are cultivating and not flying? On the other hand, Zhongxian, who had only noticed the bitter expressions on the faces around him, shook his head helplessly. That was truly his honest opinion. He was neither boasting nor showing off. Putting aside Zhao Ya, Yuan Dao, and the others, who were going to inherit powerful heritages, even Wang Ying had reached nascent Saint Pinnacle and was about to achieve a breakthrough anytime soon. On the other hand, his apothecary student, Luo Chichi, had already achieved strength on par with him, Saint Realm Wundan Pinnacle, and if he did not achieve a breakthrough soon, the other party might very well surpass him. It was not that he did not want to take his time, but with his students chasing right behind him, if he slacked off in the least, he would find himself lagging far behind them. Honestly speaking, he was also in a very difficult situation. Why wouldn't anyone just take him seriously when he said such words? It truly was not easy to be a teacher. Suppressing the urge to sink his fist into the other party's face, Shihao lowered his head and asked, to be able to accumulate such an immense reserve of zhenqi within a single month, may I ask how Sunsha cultivates? If it is not too much to ask, we would like to learn from you as well. Realizing that this might be an opportunity for them, the others echoed Shihao's words and bowed deeply as well. They had been stuck in the same cultivation realm for several years or even several decades for some. To them, cultivation was a lengthy and tiresome process, reminiscent of water droplets slowly grinding away on a rock. Yet, the young man before them had only cultivated for a month, and he had already amassed sufficient strength to destroy 10 stone walls simultaneously. If they could learn his cultivation technique, their cultivation would surely soar rapidly as well. How do I cultivate? Hearing the question, Zhongxian turned to look at the crowd before him and smiled. Actually, it isn't anything complicated. A single word, conception. Take your art of drawing ocean as an example. I heard that you hunted down saint beasts and gathered saint-tier medicinal herbs in order to complement the innate flaws in your body. You even went to the extent of heading underground to temper your zhenqi through the heart of the lava. You did manage to advance your fighting prowess significantly through such methods, but there's a cap to how far you can go by relying on external means. It will be harder for you to advance any further in such manner. The art of drawing oceans empties out great oceans and converts them into devastating power for you to wield. In order to truly comprehend the conception behind the cultivation technique, you have to first understand the boundlessness of the ocean and comprehend its natural state. Once you manage to comprehend its conception, your body will naturally become as vast and boundless as the ocean, too. Zhongxian had seen the manual for the art of drawing oceans in the library earlier, and after compiling it with the other manuals, He had gained a deep understanding to what the cultivation technique was at its very core. Conception. Shi Hao hesitated for a moment before continuing on. I once spent half a year on a remote island in the hope of comprehending the essence of the cultivation technique, but I didn't make much of an improvement that way. That's also why I chose to resort to external means instead. There were at least several thousand books explaining the art of drawing oceans in the library, and a couple of them had spoken about conception. Drawing on those insights, Shi Hao had attempted to further his cultivation that way too, but his effort had turned out to be futile. As such, he had only been able to try other means. It was fortunate that hard work did not fail him, and his cultivation finally achieved a level far surpassing the others. Do you know why you weren't able to succeed despite spending half a year on a remote island? Zhong Xian asked. This. Shi Hao halted. If he knew, he would have already corrected it long ago. He would not have ended up seeking alternative means. Your mind is too fixated on surpassing the record. Zhong Xian placed his hands behind his back and sighed deeply. Your fixation on the record had made you deeply apprehensive, depriving you of even the courage to challenge the trial once. You have always told yourself that you would only challenge the trial once you have reached the very apex of Saint Wan Dan, but where is that apex? Do you think that you are already at the apex? If you have truly reached the apex, why aren't you able to rival a single finger of mine? The vast ocean accepts every river that converges into it. To master the art of drawing oceans, your state of mind must be vast as well. Struggle not, fight not, desire not, plead not, and only then will you be able to peer into the essence of the technique. But you are too fixated on whether you can surpass Combat Master Feng Moxiao's record or not. From the very start, your state of mind has been incredibly narrow. With such a mindset, you will never be able to comprehend the sheer vastness of the ocean no matter how long you remain on a remote island. Zhong Xian sighed. When he sparred with Shi Hao, the Library of Heaven's Path had compiled a book on the other party. With a glance at it, he could tell that despite Shi Hao's strong foundation in the art of drawing oceans, he had inadvertently gone down the wrong path. Shi Hao's body stiffened. Closing his eyes, the 20 years of hard work he had devoted to furthering his cultivation flashed through his mind. Some time later, he opened his eyes once more. Stepping forward, he kneeled down and kowtowed. I have benefited greatly from Sun Shi's teachings. If you hadn't pointed out the path for me, I might have continued deviating from the true path and eventually limited my own accomplishment. After all of those memories played in his mind, he understood that he had erred. Had it not been for the timely reminder from the young man before him, he would have continued treading down the same path. Perhaps, his cultivation would still rise swiftly, but eventually, he would find it harder and harder for him to reach higher realms, and the primordial spirit realm could very well have ended up becoming a pipe dream for him. It was fortunate that someone had pulled him back from the cliff before that happened. It was still not too late for him to change. There's no need to stand on ceremony, we are just exchanging insights with one another. Zhong Xian hurriedly helped Shi Hao up. Another combat master stepped forward and asked, I have been stuck at St. Wandan Pinnacle for 5 whole years. 5 years ago, I failed to clear the trial of inner breath, and 5 years later, I am still unable to overcome my limits. I hope that Sun Shi can offer me some pointers. Have I gone down the wrong path for my cultivation, or is my state of mind still too lacking? Execute a battle technique. Yes. The combat master began executing a forceful punching routine. His zhenqi flowed through his body with incredible momentum, creating resounding cracking sounds. That's enough. Zhong Xian stopped the other party halfway through. If I'm not mistaken, you cultivate the Combat Master Hall's river reversing art, right? River reversing and drawing oceans, these two cultivation techniques boast the greatest zhenqi quantity within the inner breath division. Under normal circumstances, 5 years of accumulation should have allowed you to clear the examination easily, but you still remain limited by your bottleneck. This isn't a problem with your talent. You are still cultivating based on the formula left behind by Combat Master by Mo 2000 years ago, aren't you? How did you know? Exclaimed the Combat Master in shock. Combat Master by Mo was known for his astounding accomplishment in the river reversing art, so the combat master idolized him greatly. Thus, he had been cultivating based on the insights left behind by the other party. However, he had kept the matter a secret from others, so how did the young man before him know about it? Combat Master Bai Mo was born with innate divine strength, and he specialized in water attribute cultivation techniques. Naturally, he was well suited to cultivate the river reversing art. On the other hand, you are of the earth attribute, and earth curbs water. Naturally, your improvement is significantly slower when you try to emulate Combat Master Bai Mo's actions. You can try cultivating the compact Gaia formula left behind by Combat Master Hong Jiang instead. In less than a month, you should be able to achieve a breakthrough, Zhong Xian said. Earth attribute. Am I not of the water attribute? The combat master was visibly surprised by Zhong Xian's words. You were born with the water attribute, but an earth attribute medicinal herb that you have consumed has resulted in earth becoming your dominant attribute instead, Zhong Xian replied with a smile. Even though one's constitution was predominantly decided at birth, under the right circumstances and with the right artifacts, it was still possible for it to change. Such was the case for the combat master before him. He had been born with the water attribute, but a certain medicinal herb that he had consumed unknowingly had ended up sealing his original water attribute constitution. As a result, his rate of cultivation had ended up slowing significantly, resulting in his seeming loss in talent. The combat master was taken aback. In an instant, a thought seemed to strike his mind as he recalled something, and his body jolted. He immediately bowed deeply and said, Sun Shu, thank you for your guidance. You have truly opened my eyes. In this moment, it was apparent to all of the combat masters that the young man before them wasn't just powerful, his eye of discernment had also reached an unbelievable level. Sun Shu, I also face some problems with my cultivation. Seeing that two combat masters had benefited greatly from the young man's guidance, the eyes of the other combat masters lit up, and they charged forward in excitement. Everyone, there's no need to get anxious. I know that all of you are interested in knowing how you can increase the amount of zhenqi in your body, so why don't I conduct a lecture to impart my insights on the matter instead? Hopefully, it will prove to be of some use to you. Seeing that everyone had gathered around him, Zhong Xian quickly calmed them down with a smile. After everyone had settled down, he started his lecture. In order to enhance the quantity of zhenqi in one's body, it is of paramount importance that one comprehends how a body contains zhenqi, the dantian. Only when the dantian is sufficiently large will one be able to store a greater amount of zhenqi. Zhong Xian's voice was resounding, and small flowers began descending from the sky. Combat masters were the strongest fighting force of the Master-Teacher Pavilion, and they devoted their lives to protecting mankind from all threats. Naturally, Zhong Xian would not turn them down. After all, this was also part of his responsibility as a master-teacher. Even though they were going to be the opponents of the Shenxian faction during the exchange, in a sense, it would also be beneficial to the Shenxian faction if their opponents were strong. Perhaps, it might motivate the members of the Shenxian faction to work harder than ever. After comprehending the heart of a teacher, the concept of lineage had already become blurred in his mind. He was no longer as fixated on the idea of my student and the others anymore. As long as the other party was of good character and was willing to learn, he would not hesitate to teach them. You are saying that this was caused by Sun Shu? Standing within the trial of inner breath, Division Head Wei widened his eyes in disbelief. That's right. It was still perfectly intact when Shi Hao left the area. It was only after Sun Shu left that the area fell into such a state. Xiaobo quickly replied. Destroy all of the stone walls in a single palm and attain a score of 100. Just how much zhenqi does he have? Division Head Wei's breathing hastened in agitation. All along, he had thought that even if Sun Shu was powerful and had formidable burst power, there was no way the amount of zhenqi that he had would be able to match up to normal combat masters, let alone a genius of Shi Hao's caliber. At that moment, he could not help but notice how naive his thoughts had been. To devastate the trial with a single palm, the amount of zhenqi that Sun Shu wielded had already reached an inconceivable level. I have no idea either, but with his strength, if we can convince him to join our ranks, Our Combat Master Hall will be peerless among all of the conferred Empire Combat Master Halls, Xiaobo said. You're right. Division Head Wei nodded. Ever since the establishment of the Combat Master Hall, the highest record that anyone had achieved was 38 from Shahao. On the other hand, Sun Sure, in a single palm strike, had managed to achieve a score of 100. At this rate, it was only a matter of time before he pierced a hole in the heavens. Without a doubt, there was no combat master in any other conferred Empire Combat Master Hall who could possibly possess such an astounding Zhenqi reserve. Let's go. We'll invite him to join our Inner Breath Division. The more Division Head Wei pondered over the matter, the more seduced he was by the idea. Thus, he immediately turned around and left. Division Head Wei, what do we about the trial then? Xiao Bo asked anxiously. He had been planning to take the trial of Inner Breath right after Sun Sure, only to find it devastated. Given that it had been utterly destroyed, the promotion system that had been put in place would fall apart. Don't worry about it. After we deal with Sun Sure's matter, I will head to the Formation Master Guild and invite Guild Leader Han over to help us repair the trial's formation. While the formation is at grade 8, it shouldn't be too difficult for him to repair it once he studies the blueprint. Division Head Wei smiled. He might be unable to fix the formation in the trial of Inner Breath, but he could always engage the help of the local Formation Master Guild. With Guild Leader Han's help, that should not be a problem at all. Alright, let's head out. After explaining the matter, Division Head Wei left the passageway and headed to where he had left Sun Sure previously. Chapter 1126, Grand Constellation Finger Teacher. Division Head Wei and Xiao Bo were startled. They had only left for the trial of Inner Breaths for a moment, so how in the world did so many combat masters of the Inner Breath Division suddenly become Sun Sure's students? Didn't they acknowledge their teacher a little? No, way too fast. Division Head Wei was utterly confused by the twist in the situation before him. He could not comprehend what was going on at all. While combat masters were expected to obey the orders of their superiors, the relationship between division heads and the combat masters under them was similar to that of brothers. There was not a particularly strict hierarchy between them. It was for this reason that Shahao and Xiao Bo had expressed themselves rather casually before Division Head Wei, not restraining themselves in the least. For a teacher to suddenly pop out before those brothers all of a sudden. He had been intending to bring Sun Sure into the Inner Breath Division, but all of a sudden, the latter had become everyone's teacher. What the heck was going on? Just as he was wondering what kind of sorcery Sun Sure had cast over them, the young man suddenly shook his head and said, "There's really no need for this. Please rise. The path to cultivation is not one that should be walked in isolation. Only through trading insights and learning from one another will we be able to advance further. It's sufficient for us to speak to one another as peers. There's no need for you to address me as your teacher." It was just a simple lecture from him, so he did not think that they would suddenly acknowledge him as their teacher. This had left him in an awkward position. Sun Sure's teachings are direct, and they point directly toward the essence of cultivation. I have benefited greatly from your guidance. Given so, it's only right for me to address you as my teacher. In fact, I am honored to have you as my teacher, Shahao said. As a renowned genius of the Combat Master Hall, it was inevitable that he was a prideful person. Under normal circumstances, it would be hard to say whether even the Hall Master himself would be able to win his respect, and yet, he was showing such deep reverence for the man before him. Not only did the other party enlighten him on the problems in his cultivation, more importantly, the guidance he had offered was truly full of wisdom, clearing the shadows veiling his eyes. As long as he absorbed all of the knowledge, he was certain that he would be able to advance his Zhenqi capacity significantly to an unfathomable level. Such valuable knowledge, and the other party had imparted it to him without any reservations. Just this generosity in itself was sufficient to make him willingly address the other party as his teacher. This was how he felt deep in his heart as well. Indeed, Sun Sure. We earnestly regard you as our teacher, so please don't turn us down. With the knowledge that you have imparted to us, we'll surely be able to advance our cultivation swiftly. Clearing the examination will be a walk in the park. The others quickly nodded in agreement. This Division Head Wei was completely stunned. It was a moment ago that he had wondered whether Sun Sha had used some kind of underhanded method to force the combat masters in the Inner Breath Division to become his students, but upon seeing this sight, it was apparent that it was an earnest gesture from the depths of combat masters' hearts. He had only left for the trial of inner breath for a moment. Just what in the world did Sun Sha lecture on that won him the respect of so many people within this short period of time? All right then. Seeing that the combat masters were determined, even though Zhong Xian was a little troubled by the matter, he eventually relented and nodded in agreement. Just as he had said, he only regarded it as an exchange, and it was with this notion in mind that he had conducted a lecture for them. It was never his intention to accept them as his students, so he could not help but feel a little lost when all of them suddenly addressed him as their teacher. It seemed like being too outstanding was a trouble as well. No matter where he went, everyone just wanted to take him as their teacher. How problematic. Division Head Wei, you have returned. Alright, let's head to the martial arts division then. Just as Zhong Xian was a little unsure of what he should do at the moment, he suddenly saw Division Head Wei walking over, so he quickly grasped this opportunity to free himself from this slightly awkward situation. Alright then. Division Head Wei nodded blankly. Without saying too much, he began leading Zhong Xian toward the martial arts division. The martial arts division was not far from the inner breath division. It was only a short walk before they arrived at their destination. Division Head Feng is a good friend of mine. We have known each other for more than 300 years now. As long as I make a request on your behalf, he should allow you to browse through his collection, Division Head Wei said with a smile. Division Head Feng used to be a renowned master teacher of the Qingyuan Empire Master Teacher Pavilion. He was skilled in all kinds of battle techniques, and his fighting prowess was terrifying. Eventually, Hall Master Xing personally invited him over, offering him the position as the head of the martial arts division so that he could help groom generation after generation of combat masters. Division Head Wei had already been acquainted with him before the other party joined the Combat Master Hall, and their relationship had only gotten closer since then. A combat master stepped forward and said, reporting to Division Head Wei, "Our division head went out a moment ago, and he hasn't returned yet." He hasn't returned yet? Division Head Wei frowned. I'm afraid so. The combat master lowered his head apologetically. When he returns, tell him that there's something I need his help on. Since Division Head Feng was not around, there was nothing they could do. Thus, Division Head Wei could only shake his head in disappointment. I'll relay your message to him, Division Head Wei, the combat master replied with a smile. Actually, if Division Head Wei is seeking to borrow our division head's book collection, there's no need to wait for our division head to return. Our division head has stored most of the battle technique and cultivation technique manuals he has collected in the trial of martial arts. As long as one successfully clears the trial, one will be granted access to that collection for as long as one want. Trial of martial arts? Division Head Wei asked. He rarely had time to come over to the martial arts division, so he was unsure of the various systems in place for it. On top of that, he did not recall the martial arts division having a trial in the past. That's right. In the trial of martial arts, the challenger will first pick a battle technique from among several hundred, and as long as you are able to defeat the puppet left behind by our division head while using the battle technique, you will be considered to have cleared the trial, the combat master explained. Division Head Wei nodded in realization. In a sense, it was a system that was strikingly similar to their inner breath divisions. One should learn other battle techniques only after one had achieved a certain level of mastery in the battle technique one was currently practicing. After all, even if one were to learn a huge array of battle techniques, it would be completely meaningless if one could not use them effectively in battle. Sun Sha. Division Head Wei turned to seek Zhong Xian's opinion. I don't mind giving the trial of martial arts a try, Zhong Xian replied with a smile. Since he could access the books just by clearing the trial, there was no need for him to owe a favor to Division Head Wei over this minor matter. Alright, I'll lead the both of you over then. The combat master smiled before leading the way forward. Not too long later, they arrived at a vast hall. Similar to the entrance of the trial of inner breath, it was crowded with combat masters. Most of them had grim expressions on their faces. This is the trial of martial arts. The wall over there lists the names of the many battle techniques for the trial. As long as one is able to achieve major accomplishment in any one of them, one will be qualified to challenge the puppet our division head left behind. After defeating the puppet, one will be able to enter the library and assess our division head's collection of books. Sunsha, are there any familiar battle techniques on the list that you see? If there are any, tell me and I'll register you for the trial, the combat master said. In the short talk they had while walking over, he learned that it was not division head Wei who wanted to browse through the books but the young man before him. However, for the young man to be accompanied by a division head, he could not help but wonder what kind of identity the young man had. Let me take a look. Zhongxian nodded as he turned his gaze to the wall. There were all kinds of battle techniques listed on it: thousand leaves palm, fist of red thread, asterism finger. There was a huge variety, and making a swift count, there were actually more than 200 techniques listed. There are so many of them. Zhongxian was astonished. It's our division head's hobby to collect such manuals. Listed up there are all of the common Saint-tier battle techniques in Qingyuan Empire. Is there a technique that Sunsha specializes in? The combat master asked. This. Zhongxian suddenly felt a little awkward. This is the first time I have heard of these battle techniques. I haven't practiced even one of them before. These battle techniques were unique to Combat Master Hall and the Qingyuan Empire, and considering that it hadn't even been a day since Zhongxian arrived here, there was no way he could have heard of any of these battle techniques before, let alone practice them. The combat master was taken aback. All of the easier Saint-tier battle techniques in the Qingyuan Empire are listed up there. As a Saint 1 Dan pinnacle cultivator, Sun Shi has never practiced any of them before. Of the 200 or so battle techniques, 180 of them were straightforward and easy to master. Yet, to actually not know a single one of them, just how weak was he? I have only cultivated one Saint-tier battle technique so far, but it isn't among the 200 techniques up there, Zhongxian replied with an embarrassed smile. Most of his stronger battle techniques had come from the Hongyuan Empire, but none of them had reached Saint-tier yet. Only the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm, which he had learned from the ancient domain, had reached Saint-tier, but even so, he thought that there were too many flaws in it, so he had not practiced it anymore afterwards. You have only learned one Saint-tier battle technique? And it isn't within the list? The combat master glanced at Zhongxian with an inconspicuous hint of disdain in his eyes. He had thought that the other party was a genius from some powerful clan, but who would have thought that he was an inexperienced greenhorn instead? In the martial arts division, combat masters who hadn't mastered at least 3 Saint-tier battle techniques would not even dare to walk with their heads up. That's right, Zhongxian replied. Following which, he pondered for a moment before adding, do you have any of the manuals for the battle techniques listed on the wall? I'll quickly learn one before challenging the trial of martial arts. He might not have learned any of the battle techniques listed on the wall, but it was not a problem at all. He could always just learn on the spot. You'll quickly learn one before challenging the trial of martial arts. The combat master nearly burst into laughter. If it was not for the fact that the young man had been brought there by division head Wei, he would have berated the other party at this very moment. Saint-tier battle techniques might have been commonplace in the martial arts division, but any single one of them could easily be considered a trump card in a battle in the Qingyuan Empire. It was true that most of the listed battle techniques were straightforward, but it would still take at least several years of practice before one could achieve major accomplishment in any one of the techniques and challenge the puppet. Even the more talented geniuses of their martial arts division would require at least 2 years of practice before they dared enter the trial of martial arts. Yet, this fellow sure spoke big words. It sounded as if he would challenge the trial right after learning it on the spot. Ignorance sure emboldened guts. Pushing his displeasure back down, the combat master advised patiently, I understand your desire to clear the trial of martial arts, but mastering a battle technique isn't as easy as you think it is. Regardless of the battle technique, it will require diligent practice over numerous years before one can even come close to reaching major accomplishment. Thank you for your advice, I appreciate that. However, I think that it's worth a try. If you have a manual of any of the listed battle techniques, I hope that you can lend it to me for a moment, Zhongxian replied. If he could compile the Saint-tier battle technique given by the other party with his current collection in the Library of Heaven's Path to create a Heaven's Path battle technique, he could still consider cultivating it. Otherwise, there was no way he would waste his effort on it. All right then. The combat master was going to fly to a rage after seeing how obstinate Zhongxian was on the matter, but noting that division head Wei was by the side, he could only suppress his rage. Flicking his wrist, he took out a book. This is the manual for Grand Constellation Finger that I am currently practicing. It's among the 200 battle techniques on the wall, but I'll have to warn you that it might be a little difficult for you. I had to spend 7 years on it before I was able to reach minor accomplishment, the combat master explained with a hint of pride on his face. You took 7 years to reach minor accomplishment in the Grand Constellation Finger? Division head Wei suddenly thought of something, and his eyebrows shot up. Wait a moment, are you the genius of the martial arts division whom Division Head Feng often speaks about, Jiao Tan? When they were looking for Division Head Feng, he had been the only combat master who happened to be in the vicinity, so they had approached him out of convenience to ask for the latter's whereabouts. As such, they were not aware of the other party's name. However, upon hearing of the name of the battle technique and the duration the other party had taken to cultivate it to minor accomplishment, Division Head Wei suddenly recalled this matter. The Grand Constellation Finger was definitely the most difficult to master out of the 200 battle techniques listed on the wall, as well as the most powerful one. Even Division Head Feng had required 23 years before he could achieve minor accomplishment in the technique, but the other party had only taken 7 years. His talent was truly frightening. Indeed, that's me. Combat Master Jiao Tan nodded with an air of dignity around him. Chapter 1127, 11 Breaths I See. Upon learning that the other party was the famed genius of the martial arts division, a figure who stood toe-to-toe with Shahao, Division Head Wei nodded before turning to Zhongxian. Sunshe, let me get another battle technique for you. Mastering the Grand Constellation Finger won't be easy. Even among the 200 battle techniques listed on the wall, it's considered one of the harder ones. Considering that Division Head Feng was not a combat master and didn't receive the systematic training that they underwent before, it was not surprising that he had taken 2 decades to achieve minor accomplishment in the technique. However, Jiao Tan was the most talented individual of the martial arts division of the current generation, and yet, he had still taken 7 years to reach minor accomplishment. It was no wonder the Grand Constellation Finger was famed as one of the hardest battle techniques to master in the martial arts division. Zhongxian shook his head as he casually took the manual of the Grand Constellation Finger from Jiao Tan's hands and flipped through it. There's no need to go through so much trouble, I'll just practice this one. To him, as long as he could compile a Heaven's Path battle technique, it mattered not which of the 200 battle techniques he practiced. Knowing that he would draw hostility from the other party if he attempted to dissuade him too much, Division Head Wei conceded. All right then. If you wish to give up at any point in time, feel free to tell me. I'll bring you another battle technique. Often, a cultivator had to try practicing the battle technique themselves before they would truly understand how difficult it was. Once the other party stumbled on the technique, failing to even achieve novice mastery quickly, he would finally understand how difficult the Grand Constellation Finger was. Clearly, Jiao Tan also harbored the same thoughts in mind. He stared at the conceited young man before him intently, waiting to see the look of desperation on the other party's face once he realized that he could not comprehend the content of the manual. However, his expectations did not come to be. Instead of desperation, he found himself looking at a face frowning in disgust. What do you mean by that? Jiao Tan questioned in displeasure. It was one thing for the other party to be unable to comprehend the manual, but what was with the look of disgust on his face? It was as if the other party thought that he was too good for their battle technique. Zhongxian hesitated for a moment before replying, "It's nothing," after which, he turned his attention back to the manual in his hands, and a moment later, he sighed deeply and said, "Forget it. I guess there's no choice." With a look of resignation reminiscent of one who was ready to face death, Zhongxian closed his eyes. "You Seeing how the other party's expression grew even more exaggerated than before, Jiao Tan felt so wrathful that he could have blown up on the spot. The Grand Constellation Finger might not be a top-notch battle technique, but it was at least one of the stronger techniques in the martial arts division. Normal cultivators would find it profound and difficult to cultivate, but they would still be honored to learn it. Yet, this fellow had a look of complete repulsion on his face, as if a fly had entered his mouth. That was really a little too much. Jiao Tan harumphed coldly. What's with your poor attitude? Even if you can't comprehend the intricacies of the Grand Constellation Finger, surely you need not act in such a disrespectful manner. But before he could finish his words, a powerful aura carrying an air of antiquity and vastness suddenly burst forth from the young man before him. Following which, the young man suddenly raised his right hand and tapped at the space before him with his forefinger. Tzla. A burst of zhenqi tore across air, creating a deafening, piercing sound reminiscent of a piece of paper being torn into two. One could vaguely see stars rotating around the young man's fingertip, as if he had the world in his hands. The Grand Constellation Finger was a technique created by an elder of the Combat Master Hall more than 10,000 years ago. That elder had carefully observed the movements of celestial bodies, and emulating the positioning of the stars with his zhenqi, he had created this finger art. This technique was feared not only for its powerful physical might. The finger art carried the vastness of the universe within it as well, and those facing it would feel as if they were traversing through boundless space, exerting great pressure on their souls. As such, it was extremely difficult to guard against this attack. However, it was also for the same reason that it was extremely difficult for ordinary cultivators to comprehend. There were even some who had dedicated their entire lives to it, only to remain oblivious to the power of the stars on their deathbed. Jiao Tan's initial intention of offering the Grand Constellation Finger to Sun Shi was because he could not stand the other party's arrogance and wanted to teach him some humility. However, upon seeing the burst of zhenqi from the other party's finger, his eyes narrowed, and his body trembled. This is novice. He had thought that the other party was just putting on an act in order to spare himself from the embarrassment of being unable to comprehend the battle technique, and yet, just after shutting his eyes for an instant, he had actually managed to achieve novice master. One must know that even Jiao Tan himself had taken an entire year to reach novice mastery. Tzzzzzzzzzz. While Jiao Tan was astonished beyond measure, the zhenqi gathering on the young man's finger was swiftly growing stronger and stronger, to the point where a deep rumbling sound could be heard from the sheer accumulation of power. In that instant, Jiao Tan felt as if the entire room had turned dark, and the stars around him threatened to fall upon him. This is initiate. Jiao Tan gulped down a mouthful saliva as his face turned completely pale. The biggest hurdle in the Grand Constellation Finger lay in the initial phase, where one had to comprehend the power of the stars in order to draw upon the might of the technique. Once one overcame this challenge, the subsequent cultivation of the technique would be a little easier and faster. But even so, it was not supposed to be so fast. How long did the other party take? 10 breaths? 5 breaths? Or only 2 breaths? A tap of his finger, and the other party was already at initiate. Before he could even begin to process what was going on, the other party was already at initiate. Is this even humanly possible? Jiao Tan's felt his throat turn dry. He quickly turned his gaze to ask Division Head Wei just what kind of background the young man came from to be able to grasp the Grand Constellation Finger so easily, only to see Division Head Wei staring at the young man with bulging eyes as well. Clearly, Division Head Wei had not expected the young man to be able to advance from novice to initiate that quickly either. After all, this was something that defied common sense. Division Head Wei. Fearing that he would interrupt the cultivating Sun Shi, Jiao Tan opted to send a telepathic message over instead. Division Head Wei was jolted out of his shock. Has Sun Shi really not practiced the Grand Constellation Finger in the past? Jiao Tan asked doubtfully. Recalling the various incredible deeds the young man had achieved earlier, Division Head Wei contemplated for a moment before replying. That should be the case. There's no need for someone of his caliber to lie about something as minor as this. A collaboration between the Hall Master and 2 division heads, and Sun Sha was still able to escape unscathed. Not only so, he even managed to find an opportunity to tap into the formation of the Heart Division to subdue them. And just earlier, he had destroyed all 10 stone walls in the trial of inner breath with a single palm strike. Surely a person of such great capability would not need to lie just to inflate his ego. It was more likely that the Grand Constellation Finger was simply easy to him. If he has not practiced the Grand Constellation Finger before and really managed to reach initiate within just a few breaths, won't he catch up to my 7 years of effort and reach minor accomplishment in just a single day? Jiao Tan uttered with widened eyes as his lips quivered in horror. Surely not. There's a huge rift between initiate and minor accomplishment, so it shouldn't be possible for anyone to do it so quickly. Ah! Halfway through his words, Division Head Wei abruptly exclaimed in shock. At this point, the young man had straightened his arm, and a vortex reminiscent of a revolving stellar river appeared at his fingertip. Just looking at that incredible mass of power rotating on the fingertip could easily leave one lightheaded. Minor accomplishment. The duo fearfully took 2 steps back. It was just a moment ago that Division Head Wei had said that the other party would not reach minor accomplishment that day, but the next moment, he was forced to swallow his words. Who? Upon achieving minor accomplishment, Zhong Xian opened his eyes. He looked at the vortex of power gathered on his fingertip and sighed deeply before turning his gaze toward Jiao Tan. Does the trial of martial arts only open to those who have achieved major accomplishment in their battle technique? Jiao Tan was not too sure why the other party was asking such a question, but he swiftly nodded in response. That's right. Only one who had achieved major accomplishment in any of the 200 battle techniques would stand a chance in the trial of martial arts. Over time, this had become the prerequisite to challenging the trial. Jiao Tan was just about to explain this matter to the young man when the latter sighed deeply and said, "I see." Following which, the young man closed his eyes once more. What? Jiao Tan's cheeks twitched. You aren't thinking of pushing for a breakthrough to major accomplishment right now, are you? The Grand Constellation Finger is highly demanding on Zhenqi, and a forceful breakthrough without prior preparation could easily result in severe internal injuries. Once again, before Jiao Tan could finish his words, the young man raised his finger and tapped on the space before him once more. Voila! The air in the area was suddenly compressed tightly together. All of a sudden, Jiao Tan felt as if he was standing in the middle of the universe with innumerable stars around him. Each and every one of the stars was flying toward him with incredible momentum, threatening to crush his body into smithereens. Domain of stars. Jiao Tan's body trembled intensely. This is the level of mastery exceeding major accomplishment, consummation. The mastery of a battle technique could be divided into 5 levels: novice, initiate, minor accomplishment, major accomplishment, and consummation. It was just a moment ago that he had said that reaching major accomplishment would be nigh impossible, and the following moment, the other party managed to reach consummation with such ease. It seemed like from the moment he came into contact with the manual till he cultivated to consummation, all in all, only a dozen or so seconds had passed. And he, the most talented individual of the martial arts division, had spent 7 years only to reach minor accomplishment. An overwhelming sense of defeat left him feeling as if he would explode on the spot. There would be no damage if there was not any comparison. Not knowing that his short moment of cultivation had scared Division Head Wei and Jiao Tan to the point that they were going to spew blood at any moment, Zhong Xian opened his eyes. Truthfully, if it was not for the collection of books within, he would never have lowered himself to cultivating the Grand Constellation Finger. Even after compiling it with the finger arts in his Library of Heaven's Path, there were still 5 flaws in it. He had never thought that he would cultivate such a flawed battle technique in his life. It was for this reason that he had such a conflicted expression on his face. It was simply too hard to swallow this finger art. This must surely be the darkest stain in his history of cultivation. However, it could not be helped. He had to clear the trial of martial arts to find more Saint Tudan cultivation techniques in order to achieve a breakthrough. Otherwise, who knew how much longer it would take him? It was fortunate that none of these flaws demanded a catalyst for him to cultivate the battle technique, or else he would have been in deep trouble. Shaking away the frustrations in his mind, Zhongxian said, "I'm done. Combat Master Jiao Tan, I will have to trouble you to register me for the trial of martial arts." Most of the flaws were regarding the tearing the cultivator's meridians upon the execution of the technique, putting the cultivator in excruciating pain. However, with Zhongxian's Heaven's Pathshanqi, he could heal those tears swiftly, so it did not pose a problem. In any case, he only required it to clear the trial. At most, he would just avoid using it in the future. Why yes. Jiao Tan finally recovered from his shock. Cowering back slightly, he quickly left the area. Not too long later, he returned. "Sun Shi, I have negotiated with the combat masters in charge and gotten you the next slot for the trial. A large crowd would challenge the trial of martial arts each day, but the number that would eventually pass the trial was very low. Considering that the young man had been brought over by Division Head Wei himself, and he had already achieved the level of consummation for the Grand Constellation Finger, it was not anything much to let him go first for the trial. Thank you for your help." Zhongxian clasped his fist in gratitude before following Jiao Tan forward. The door to the trial happened to open at this moment, and a young man walked out with a gloomy expression on his face. With just a look, it was obvious that he had failed the examination. "Sun Shi, this way." Jiao Tan gestured into the opened doorway. Zhongxian walked in, and in the blink of an eye, he had already disappeared from everyone's sight. "Jiao Tan, just what is that fellow's background that you would intervene in his stead to give him priority in the queue?" "I don't know either." Jiao Tan shook his head. "You don't know? Then, surely you do know what battle technique he is going to be challenging, right?" The combat master asked again. Based on the reported battle technique, it was possible to deduce the other party's background. "His challenging the Grand Constellation Finger," Jiao Tan said. "Grand Constellation Finger? Isn't that the battle technique you are cultivating at the moment? I heard that battle technique is incredibly difficult to master. Even someone as talented as you took 7 years in order to reach minor accomplishment. For that fellow to dare challenge that battle technique, has he already achieved major accomplishment in it? But judging from his appearance, he doesn't look old enough." The combat master from before frowned. Given his young age, how long could he possibly have cultivated the technique? Probably. It was intended as a hypothetical question, but Jiao Tan happened to have the answer to it. With a bitter smile, he said, 12 breaths. "Ah, no, it should be 11 breath." Chapter 1128, Division Head Feng's Misery Who. As soon as Zhongxian stepped through the door, a puppet at the very end of the room stood up. Its appearance looked no different from a real person. With its snowy hair and beard, it resembled a human in his 60s. Most likely, it's constructed in the form of Division Head Feng, Zhongxian deduced. Division Head Feng was probably a celestial designer as well, which was not surprising since he came from the Master-Teacher Pavilion in the first place. Otherwise, it should have been impossible for him to craft such a lifelike puppet. If Zhongxian had not known in advance, he would have really thought that the figure before him was a true human. "The battle technique you have chosen is the Grand Constellation Finger. If you are able to withstand my attack with just the Grand Constellation Finger, you will have cleared the trial. Otherwise, you'll have to leave and try again next time," the puppet said in an impassive tone. "All right." Zhongxian nodded as he took a step forward. Pitting the same battle technique against a puppet of the same cultivation realm, even if he did not use his Eye of Insight and Library of Heaven's Path, he was still absolutely confident that he would be the one to emerge victorious in the very end. Reporting to Hall Master Xing, it appears that Division Head Wei has taken Sun Larosha to the Martial Arts Division. Hall Master Xing and the others had led Elder Qi to the Inner Breath Division, but Zhongxian and Division Head Wei were nowhere to be found. Thus, he had turned his sight toward Shahao, and he soon received his answer. Hall Master Xing frowned. "What are they doing at the Martial Arts Division?" "I'm not too sure either." Shahao shook his head. "Hold on a moment. Did you just address Sun Shi as Sun Larosha?" The sharp division head Liao swiftly noticed that there was something amiss with Shahao's words. Addressing Sun Qiong as Sun Shi was a respectful way to refer to master teachers, But Sun Larosha meant something even deeper than that. It was a way to address one who had enlightened them greatly in their path. Yes, Sun Larosha has given us invaluable pointers in our cultivation. We are extremely grateful to him. Shahao nodded. This. Hall Master Xing and the others glanced at one another and frowned. It was one thing for a spirit awakener to provide pointers to combat masters, but to win the respect of so many of them and have them acknowledge him as their teacher simultaneously. Just what in the world had happened? Soon, upon clarifying the situation, the trio was dumbfounded. Destroying the trial of inner breath with a single palm strike and subduing Shahao with just a finger. Just how much Zhenqi did Sun Sha possess? Let's head to the martial arts division to take a look, said Hall Master Xing, intrigued, before quickly making his way over to the martial arts division. Soon, he arrived at the entrance of the trial of martial arts. You're all here. At this moment, Division Head Wei suddenly noticed the old man standing alongside Hall Master Xing and Division Head Liao, and his eyes lit up as he quickly clasped his fist respectfully. Elder Qi, you are fine? Yuan Elder Qi nodded. Where is Sun Sha? Ah, he just entered the trial, Division Head Wei replied with a smile. Trial? Hall Master Xing frowned. Sun Sha is trying to find some Saint Tu Dan cultivation technique manuals, but there aren't any suited for him in the inner breath division. Thus, we came over to look for Division Head Feng, but he happened to not be around. So, Sun Sha decided to challenge the trial of martial arts so as to gain access to Division Head Feng's collection of book. Division Head Wei swiftly summarized the happenings. Recalling when they faced the young man earlier and the astounding sight they had witnessed at the inner breath division, Hall Master Xing stroked his beard and remarked, with his strength, clearing the trial shouldn't be a problem. A genius of Sun Sha's caliber would not face any trouble clearing the trial of martial arts. There was no need to worry about him. Hall Master Xing continued after a brief pause. Speaking of which, didn't Division Head Feng return to the martial arts division right after our conference? He usually spends his time cooped up within the martial arts division, and there have been no reports saying that he has sneaked out like the others. It's a little weird that he isn't around here. Except for collecting new cultivation techniques and battle technique manuals, Division Head Feng's greatest hobby was to isolate himself in his living quarters to study battle techniques. In fact, there were many times when Hall Master Xing had invited him to various formal occasions, only to be rejected for this reason. Considering how he did not defect to the Shenxian faction like Division Head Ju and Division Head Wu, it seemed a little bizarre for him not to be in the martial arts division. I was also wondering the same thing, Division Head Wei said. He had been a little perplexed by the matter when he heard from Jiao Tan that Division Head Feng wasn't around. However, out of respect for Division Head Feng's privacy, he had chosen not to inquire too deeply. Old Feng actually willingly came out of his den? Why do I find that inconceivable? Wait a moment, could it be? In the middle of his words, Division Head Liao suddenly recalled a matter and froze. What's wrong? Noting that Division Head Liao had thought of something, Hall Master Xing and the others quickly turned their attention to him. As you know, I have a close relationship with Old Feng. He regularly comes over to seek my help in clearing his inner demons. On one of these occasions, he told me that he has a bizarre habit. Division Head Liao spoke with twitching lips. From time to time, he hides in the trial of martial arts and pretends to be the puppet so as to assess his combat masters personally. Pretends to be the puppet? Everyone was stunned. They had not expected to hear such words. That's right. The trial of martial arts is usually conducted by the puppet crafted by Old Feng, but facing multiple combat masters every single day, it inevitably accumulates damage and breaks down from time to time. In such cases, he suppresses his cultivation and acts as the puppet to battle with the challenging combat masters. Gulping down a mouthful of saliva, Division Head Liao continued. I only heard of this matter from him once though, so I took it as a joke. But, could it be true? A division head pretending to be a puppet in a trial was not a particularly shocking incident. Naturally, Division Head Feng would not tell such a secret to just anyone, so there were not many in the Combat Master Hall who knew of the matter. Or perhaps, Division Head Liao might even have been the only one aware of the issue. For Division Head Feng to suddenly disappear despite there being no traces that he had left the Combat Master Hall, could he really be acting as a puppet in the trial of martial arts at that very moment? Hall Master Xing was stunned for a moment before asking anxiously, what battle technique did Sun Shi choose? Considering how dedicated Division Head Feng was toward the pursuit of battle techniques, there was no knowing if he would get serious with Sun Shi. It would not be too much of a problem if Division Head Feng injured any of the combat masters, they would at least still be able to resolve it internally, but Sun Shi was their esteemed guess. He chose the Grand Constellation Finger, Division Head Wei replied. That is indeed a powerful battle technique, but it's incredibly difficult to master as well. Sun Shi actually managed to master such a powerful technique despite his age. Hall Master Xing was stunned. He didn't know any of the battle techniques, so Jiao Tan offered him the manual of the Grand Constellation Finger, and he learned it on the spot. Division Head Wei spoke hesitantly, unsure of how he should explain the matter to the others. Before he could finish his words, Division Head Liao had already interjected in a panic. He is going against Old Feng despite only learning the technique moments ago. You should have stopped him. Old Feng is a lunatic, you know. If he learns that Sun Shi is challenging the trial of martial arts after just learning the fundamentals of the technique, he will think that the other party is disrespecting the solemnity of the trial and fly into a ray. You also know how seriously Old Feng takes the cultivation of battle techniques. This is really bad. Old Feng won't show any mercy once he is blinded by wrath. We have to rush in to stop him. At this point, Division Head Liao's eyes were widened in horror, and goosebumps rose all over his arms. Division Head Feng, just like his surname one, was a true lunatic. He took everything relating to battle techniques seriously, and he would never allow anyone to sully it in the least. Given that Sun Shi had just learned the Grand Constellation Finger moments ago, his lack of mastery would surely show through in the trial in an instant. Once Division Head Feng realized the matter, he would spare no punches in teaching Sun Shi a lesson. And against a raging primordial spirit realm expert, no matter how powerful Sun Shi was, there was no way he could last too long against him. Jia. Panicking, Division Head Liao and the others quickly rushed toward the door of the trial of martial arts to save Sun Shi, but at that moment, the door suddenly creaked open. A young man calmly walked out from the door. As he walked, he leisurely adjusted his robe to tidy himself up. Hall Master Xing and the others ran up to the young man, but upon seeing that the latter was completely unharmed, they couldn't help but ask in intrigue, Sun Shi, are you fine? Yuan, I'm fine, Zhongxian replied with a smile. Have you cleared the trial? Division Head Wei asked. Yuan, it wasn't too difficult. However, I am really impressed by how exquisitely the puppet is crafted. To fully emulate the situation in a true fight, it is even able to spurt blood. If I hadn't known in advance, I might have just thought that it's a real human. Spurt blood. Upon hearing those words, the lips of the crowd began twitching wildly. I was also as surprised as you are back when I saw it. However, as exquisite as it is, there are still some glitches in it that requires fixing. After I defeated it in a direct clash at the same cultivation realm using the same battle technique, I asked it if I have cleared the trial yet or not, but it did not reply to me. So, I could only continue the fight with it. As if that wasn't bad enough, its cultivation even started rising halfway through. I was afraid that I might be no match for it at that rate, so I made a preemptive strike and knocked it out. That should still be considered as a pass, right? Zhongxian asked slightly worriedly. You knocked it out? Its cultivation started rising halfway through? If they were still uncertain whether or not Division Head Feng was acting as the puppet before, Zhongxian's words had fully confirmed their doubts. The puppet had to be Division Head Feng. The puppet in the trial of martial arts was not weak, but its strength was fixed. There was no way its cultivation would suddenly rise in the midst of a battle. The only plausible explanation was that it was Division Head Feng in disguise. Let's go in to take a look. Hall Master Xing and the others quickly bypassed Zhongxian and rushed into the trial, and with just a glance at the situation inside, their faces began twitching uncontrollably. A blooded Division Head Feng was smashed into the wall, and his clothes had been torn to shreds by some kind of devastating might. His current situation was as unkempt as one could imagine. It's indeed old Feng. Division Head Liao quickly rushed forward and placed his fingers on the other party's pulse, confirming that the figure before him was indeed a living human. He flicked his wrist and swiftly popped a recovery pill into Division Head Feng's mouth. At the same time, he drove his junshi into the latter's body to help the latter assimilate the energy within the pill. Not too long later, the unconscious Division Head Feng finally came to. "What are all of you doing here?" Division Head Feng asked with a confused look. "Were you assessing a young man earlier before being knocked out?" Hall Master Xing asked hesitantly. "Yes, that does seem to be the case. The young man who came in to challenge the trial earlier has a profound comprehension of the grand constellation finger. Given the same cultivation realm and battle technique, I was no match for him at all. Intrigued, I discreetly raised my cultivation to see how far I could push him, but who would have thought that the fellow would suddenly rush over at that instant and knock me out with a flick of his finger? Then, I can't recall anything anymore." Division Head Feng's face reddened. It was not easy for him to meet someone who had achieved such incredible mastery in the grand constellation finger. As a martial arts fanatic, it was inevitable that he would be fascinated by the matter. Wanting to witness the might of the grand constellation finger in its full glory, he had attempted to push the other party a little further. But who could have expected that he would be knocked out before he achieved anything at all? How embarrassing. "You are really..." Hearing those words, Hall Master Xing could not help but sigh in vexation. For an esteemed division head of the Combat Master Hall to be pummeled into such a tragic state by a mere Saint Wundan fellow. Hall Master Xing really had no idea what to make of the matter. However, recalling how he and another 2 division heads had been completely subdued by Sun Shabak in the Heart Division at all, he realized that he was not really in a position to admonish the division head Feng either. "Right, how did you know that I was in here? Also, who is that young man?" Division Head Feng asked curiously. "I don't think I have seen him around in the Combat Master Hall before." While he did not know all of the Combat Masters in the Combat Master Hall, he could still recognize most of their faces. The face of the young man looked extremely foreign to him, so there was a good chance that he was not from their Combat Master Hall. He's a spirit awakener whom Hall Master Xing invited over to help enchant his primordial spirit, Division Head Liao explained. "He's a spirit awakener?" Division Head Feng was stunned. "But he was able to overpower me easily even when the both of us were at the same cultivation realm. You are telling me that a spirit awakener has managed to attain such a deep comprehension of the profound grand constellation finger? One must know that he was the head of the martial arts division. With his deep comprehension of battle techniques, he wielded fighting prowess far surpassing his peers. With such strength, it was nigh impossible for any cultivator of a lower cultivation realm to match him even when he had suppressed his cultivation to the other party's level. Yet, a spirit awakener had not only managed to subdue him but even easily knocked him out when he attempted to raise his cultivation. It's the truth. Sun Sha isn't just a spirit awakener but a master teacher as well. It's like this." Seeing the look of disbelief on Division Head Feng's face, Hall Master Xing could only explain the various happenings earlier. This. Division Head Feng's body stiffened in shock, not daring to believe what he had just heard. Just 11 breaths after he looked through the manual of the Grand Constellation Finger, he has already attained a mastery in the technique that far surpasses what I have achieved in the past several hundred years. Seeing that Division Head Feng had his confidence utterly shattered, Hall Master Xing quickly stepped in to change the topic. "It's meaningless to judge true geniuses by our common sense. Come, I'll introduce Sun Sha to you." Division Head Feng sighed deeply before nodding. The very moment that the group stepped out of the trial room together, they saw innumerable combat masters kneeling and kowtowing on the ground. Their excited and admiration-filled gazes were directed toward a young man not too far away. "Teacher, thank you for opening our eyes." Chapter 1129, Saint Tude and Heaven's Path Divine Art. Seeing even the most talented genius of his martial arts division bowing to the young man, Division Head Feng was completely bewildered. What in the world happened? Aren't the combat masters of our combat master hall supposed to be prideful individuals who never bow to anyone? The young man left the trial just moments earlier, and all of them had already acknowledged him as their teacher. Unable to stand it any longer, Hall Master Xing walked up to Elder Qi and asked, "Elder Qi, what is going on?" Sun Sha imparted some pointers on how one could more effectively utilize battle techniques, and it was deeply enlightening. Elder Qi replied with a face flushed crimson from agitation, and his fingers were trembling non-stop. It was as if even he was tempted to acknowledge Sun Sha as his teacher as well. Just some pointers on effectively utilizing battle techniques have left them in such a state. Division Head Feng could hardly believe what he was hearing. Their martial arts division had a huge collection of insights from preceding combat masters on how one could maximize the effectiveness of their battle techniques in battle, but most of them were conflicting with one another. Each of them made sense in their own ways, thus making it impossible to tell the correct insights from the incorrect. For Sun Sha to win the reverence of everyone here just by lecturing a bit on the subject. Wasn't that a little too exaggerated? You are only saying that because you didn't hear the content of his lecture. Forget it, it'll be difficult to explain it to you at the moment. Just grab a combat master and ask him about the matter later on. Those who had not listened to the lecture would never comprehend how profound and novel that young man's interpretation of the subject was. Ignoring the confused division head Feng, Elder Qi rushed up to Zhongxian and clasped his fist respectfully. "Sun Sha, we meet again. Thank you for saving my life back in the Jingyuan city." Even though Sun Sha had altered his appearance, there was not much change to his voice. Just by hearing him speak, Elder Qi was certain that the young man before him was the middle-aged man who had saved him back then. "It's you. What are you doing here?" Zhongxian was surprised. To his astonishment, the elder before him was the eccentric old man whom he had met in Jingyuan city. Back then, the eccentric old man had been plagued by a lethal poison, resulting in a languishing aura around him. However, in this moment, his face had a healthy red glow to it, and his aura felt more vigorous and livelier than ever. Had the other party not addressed him directly, he would not have believed that the person standing before him was actually the same old man he had met back then. "It's all thanks to Sun Sha's help. I was able to successfully make a full recovery after you cured my poison. Just a while ago, I successfully made a breakthrough, so I decided to return here to exact my vengeance," Elder Qi replied. Zhongxian nodded in realization. Without a doubt, Elder Qi's poison was the result of someone's malicious deeds. Considering how long he had suffered under the torture of the poison, there was no way he would be willing to let the culprit get away scot-free, especially since he had managed to regain his strength. "Don't worry about it. I have already received your medicinal herbs as compensation, so we're even now," Zhongxian replied with a smile. Then, he turned to Division Head Wei and said, "I have defeated the puppet earlier, so I should have cleared the trial, right? May I trouble you to lead me to the book collection?" "Of course." Division Head Wei's lips twitched a little as he swiftly nodded. Those who cleared the trial were able to access Division Head Feng's collection of books. As this was the rule Division Head Feng had set himself, there was no one who would complain about that. There was no need to trouble Division Head Feng over this matter. Besides, if the other combat masters were to learn of this matter, Division Head Feng would probably die of embarrassment. Following behind Division Head Wei, Zhongxian soon entered a library. On the other hand, upon noting Zhongxian's departure, Hall Master Xing and the others hurriedly rushed up to Elder Qi and asked, "Elder Qi, is he really the Sun Qiong you were talking about?" The reason Elder Qi had hurried over so anxiously was to confirm whether the other party was the benefactor who had saved him previously. "Yuan, he's definitely my benefactor. It doesn't seem like he's the Zhongxian person whom you were talking about." Elder Qi nodded. Given that he was acquainted with Sun Sha back at Jingyuan City, there did not seem to have been any need for the other party to disguise himself as another person back then. Going by this logic, it did not seem likely for the other party to be Principal Zhong. Thank goodness. Hall Master Xing heaved a sigh of relief. Noting the other party's response, Elder Qi asked in bewilderment, "What's wrong? Do you have a conflict with Principal Zhong? He's well respected in the Hongyuan Empire, and there's hardly any discredit to his name." Did he offend the Combat Master Hall in some way? Zhong Xian's name was resounding in the Hongyuan Empire, to the extent that his reputation surpassed even that of Emperor Yu Shenqing. Countless youths regarded him as their idol. Putting aside the many incredible feats and merits he had accomplished, there was not a shred of dishonor to his name. Given so, it should be safe to assume that he was a person of noble stature. Why would Hall Master Xing fear such a person so? There are no conflicts between us. It's a long story. Hall Master Xing realized that he had acted inappropriately upon hearing Elder Qi's question, so he quickly waved his hand. Division Head Liao sent a telepathic message to Hall Master Xing. Hall Master Xing, since it's confirmed that Sun She isn't Zhong Xian, and considering his incredible talent and outstanding comprehension of battle techniques, if we could have him represent our Combat Master Hall in the exchange with the Shenxian faction. Hearing those words, Hall Master Xing's eyes lit up. Indeed. After witnessing it with his own eyes, even he had no choice but to admit that the Shenxian faction was a formidable foe. He had been confident of victory given that he had achieved a breakthrough and obtained the highest secret art, Vitreous Heart Tempering Sutra, of the Combat Master Hall, but on second thought, there was still a huge gap between their combat skills. If the Combat Master Hall were to win by sheer strength and not skill, it would not reflect too well on them either. However, Sun She was different. In terms of combat skills, he could use a battle technique that he had learned moments ago to overwhelm Division Head Feng. In terms of state of mind, even the founder of the Heart Division had approved of him and willingly given him the highest control over the Heart Division's formations. In terms of Zhenqi, he could shatter 10 stone walls in the trial of inner breath simultaneously. In terms of real fighting prowess, he could escape from a collaborative offense from the three of them. No matter how one looked at it, Sun She was an expert among experts. There were none who could rival him in the same level. If they could have him represent the Combat Master Hall in the exchange against the Shenxian faction, the reputation of the Combat Master Hall would surely be boosted significantly. At the same time, it would also immensely increase their chances in bringing the Shenxian faction under them. That's a good idea. After another moment of deep contemplation, Hall Master Xing continued. However, he's ultimately not from our Combat Master Hall. If we have him fight on our behalf and others learn of it, will the reputation of our Combat Master Hall be sullied? That won't be a problem. We could have him represent our Combat Master Hall in the fight against Principal Zhong. If he wins, the Shenxian faction will come under our Qingyuan Empire Combat Master Hall. Once that happens, not only will our reputation not take a dip, it will even soar to unprecedented heights, Division Head Liao said. You're right. Hall Master Xing nodded. That was indeed the case. If they could have the bunch from the Shenxian faction join the Combat Master Hall, their Qingyuan Empire's branch would surely grow stronger and stronger. With time, they might even become a powerhouse within the alliance. Even if the Shenxian faction had complaints then, they could deal with it internally. It would not affect their overall situation. But, what if he loses? Hall Master Xing was still a little worried. Sun She was indeed a formidable opponent, but Principal Zhong was not a pushover either. No matter what, he was the man who single-handedly groomed their potential progeny of combat, Zheng Yang, and he was also the man behind the overwhelming strength of the Shenxian faction. There was no way such a person like that could possibly be weak. If we lose, there will be no way around it. At the very most, our entire Combat Master Hall will join the Shenxian faction, Division Head Liao said grimly. This. Hall Master Xing fell silent upon hearing those words. We have no other option at this point. Once it becomes known that Division Head Ju, Division Head Lu, and the others have already defected to the Shenxian faction, it will surely cause a huge uproar. With time, more and more combat masters will turn to the Shenxian faction, Division Head Liao said bitterly. It was not that he wanted to do this, but they were truly cornered at this point. In terms of overall prowess, the Shenxian faction was definitely no match for the Combat Master Hall. However, their comprehension of combat had reached an unfathomable level. It was inevitable that the strength-seeking combat masters would be drawn to them. Of course, this was not necessarily a bad thing. If the combat masters could learn from the Shenxian faction, their fighting prowess would be brought up to a whole new level. The only issue at the moment was who wielded the dominant position. If the Combat Master Hall was forced to be subservient to a lesser organization, they would become a laughingstock. Given that this matter concerned the future of the Combat Master Hall, Hall Master Xing had to tread carefully regarding this matter. He thought deeply for a moment before eventually sighing in resignation. "You're right, we can only do it this way now. I'll talk to Sun Sure about the matter later when he's done browsing through the books." For the Combat Master Hall to be cornered by a lesser organization from a Tier 1 empire, what a farcical situation they had found themselves in. But that was indeed what was happening, so he had no choice but to face it. It might seem absurd, but the Xianxian faction could very well be the greatest crisis they had ever faced. The Xianxian faction's superior combat skills and philosophy of impartation without discrimination were a bad match for the Combat Master Hall. Putting aside the division heads, if not for the fact that the pride and honor of the Combat Master Hall lay on his shoulders, Hall Master Xing would have rushed over to learn from them as well. At this point, he could only wish for the best. This is the library of the Martial Arts Division? What an incredible collection of books! Unaware of the thoughts of Hall Master Xing and the others, Zhongxian's excited gaze was currently fixated on the innumerable shelves of books before him. As expected of the Martial Arts Division, their collection was nothing short of impressive. On top of the 200 Saint-tier battle techniques listed for the trial of martial arts, there were also tens of thousands of Spirit-tier battle techniques as well. Zhongxian's eyes lit up in excitement. With these battle techniques, I might just be able to perfect the Heavenly Demon Great Sorrow Palm into a Heaven's Path battle technique. What he was lacking the most at the moment was high-tier battle technique manuals. With so many of them, he would be able to raise his comprehension of battle techniques up a notch, thus bringing his fighting prowess to another level. Flaws. Zhongxian swiftly laid his eyes on the first shelf and began collecting the books into his library of Heaven's Path. Hualala. Books were appearing in the library of Heaven's Path at an incredible speed. 10 minutes later, Zhongxian had finally finished taking in all of the battle technique manuals. There really is a substantial collection of Saint Tu Dan cultivation techniques here. After browsing through the battle techniques, Zhongxian turned his sight to the last few shelves and saw all kinds of Junshi cultivation techniques. All in all, there were roughly several hundred of them. There were also a couple of Saint 3 Dan and Saint 4 Dan cultivation technique manuals, but there were not too many of them, numbering only around 4 to 5 each. Zhongxian swiftly glanced over them and collected them into the library of Heaven's Path as well. Compile. In the blink of an eye, 3 books appeared before Zhongxian's eyes: Saint 2 Dan, Saint 3 Dan, and Saint 4 Dan. He swiftly flipped through them. I have finally managed to form the Saint 2 Dan Heaven's Path Divine Art. Zhongxian's eyes lit up in excitement as he heaved a sigh of relief. Those hundreds of books had allowed him to perfect the Saint 2 Dan cultivation technique. Unfortunately, there were still many flaws with the Saint 3 Dan and Saint 4 Dan cultivation techniques, so he could not cultivate them at the moment. Nevertheless, he was satisfied. I should just push for a breakthrough here, Zhongxian thought. There was no one in the library, and it was extremely quiet. At the same time, he could not be bothered to find another place outside, so he headed to a corner and entered the myriad ant-hive nest. Considering his cultivation's strong foundation, his breakthrough would surely cause a commotion. How embarrassing it would be if he were to accidentally destroy the other party's library in the midst of doing so. It would be safer for him to do it in the myriad ant-hive nest. In the myriad ant-hive nest, he quickly found himself a quiet place before setting up a grade 7 spirit gathering formation. Following which, he threw several thousand high-tier spirit stones in before sitting in the middle of it. High-tier spirit stones were starting to become ineffective in his cultivation, so he needed a spirit gathering formation to maximize their effects. Otherwise, if he were to just absorb them normally, it would be difficult for him to build up the momentum required for a breakthrough. Once all preparations were ready, Zhongxian went through the Saint 2 Dan Heaven's Path Divine Art in his mind once more before devouring the surrounding spiritual energy greedily and swiftly converting them into Junshi. Saint 2 Dan Spiritual Perception Realm. At this level, cultivators would open their incipient eye, allowing them to perceive their surroundings more vividly than any of their other senses through their spiritual perception. While a breakthrough to this realm would not raise a cultivator's basic strength by too much, the enhanced perception of one's surroundings would allow one to make more precise movements in battle, and often, that could be the difference between victory and defeat. This should be enough. Time to open my incipient eye. With his eyes closed, Zhongxian's consciousness slowly crept into his dantian before eventually stopping before his golden origin core, which sat at the center of his dantian. Chapter 1130, Knock His Teeth Out. With a tense look, Zhongxian began to drive his zhenqi according to the Saint Tude and Heaven's Path divine art. A brilliant glow burst from his origin core, and it slowly began to revolve with increasing speed. An immense wave of spiritual energy gushed in from the surrounding formation, nourishing his origin core. In the blink of an eye, a vortex of spiritual energy reminiscent of a tornado had already formed above Zhongxian, producing a deafening whirring sound. The process to opening one's incipient eye was extremely complicated, so Zhongxian dared not let his guard down. He controlled the immense amount of zhenqi flowing through his body with incredible precision, not leaving the slightest gap for error. Hong long long. As spiritual energy was gathering at a rate too fast, the myriad ant-hive nest began to shake violently. The 10 kings of the cloud mist ridge looked over with astonished looks, unable to believe what they were seeing. They had reached spiritual perception realm not too long ago, and from their experience, opening the incipient eye should not have caused such a huge ruckus. But why was it that such conventions did not apply to their master? Not only so, they even felt a powerful pressure weighing down on them. Being driven by the Heaven's Path divine art, the devoured spiritual energy was swiftly converted into the incomparably pure Heaven's Path zhenqi before being channeled toward the origin core. TZZZZZZZZ. Under the massive influx of zhenqi, the massive origin core slowly opened up, similar to a blossoming flower. A being reminiscent of an eyeball slowly emerged from within, and it looked as if it would open its eyes at any moment. This was the crucial period, and Zhongxian knew it as well. Widening his pores as large as he could, he swiftly consumed all of the spiritual energy around him and gathered it all together, forming an incredible deluge similar to a rapid river. Open! Zhongxian roared as a torrent of zhenqi surged toward his origin core. In the breakthrough to Saint Tudan, a cultivator had to channel his zhenqi toward his origin core to tear open the incipient eye. As long as the point that the zhenqi was channeled toward was correct, the incipient eye should open easily, thus unlocking the cultivator's spiritual perception. Voila! The torrent forcefully struck against Zhongxian's origin core, causing a brilliant light to burst from the latter as it revolved on the spot from the impact. However, it slowly came to a halt, and the seemingly opening incipient eye reverted back to its original shape, as if nothing had happened at all. Why isn't it working? Zhongxian frowned. He had strictly followed the Saint Tude and Heaven's Path divine art for his breakthrough, and under normal circumstances, he should have opened his incipient eye easily. Yet, why was nothing happening at all? Could there be a problem with his Heaven's Path divine art? That was impossible. Zhongxian took another look at his cultivation technique and confirmed that there were no flaws in it. Just to double-check, he examined every single sentence carefully, and there was not a single mistake in any one of them. Frowning, he thought, I should give it another try. Hong long. Spiritual energy gushed into Zhongxian's body once more, and after it was successfully converted into Heaven's Path zhenqi, it was channeled toward his origin core. Bam! After the powerful collision of the zhenqi, Zhongxian's origin core began spinning once more. However, just like before, it stopped not too long after and fell silent. Zhongxian was bewildered. His cultivation had always progressed smoothly all along, and not once had he failed in pushing for a breakthrough before. But this. He had already attempted it twice, but it still was not working. That could not be right. There was no flaw in his cultivation technique, and the amount of zhenqi that he had was sufficient as well. Let me give it another try. Frowning, Zhongxian attempted to push for another breakthrough. Some time later, Zhongxian finally came to a halt. He was panting heavily at the moment, and there was a bitter smile on his face. I finally get it. There's no mistake the cultivation technique, and I didn't comprehend it incorrectly either. It's that my origin core is too powerful, and the spiritual energy within high-tier spirit stones isn't pure enough to stimulate it. That's why I wasn't able to open my incipient eye. After multiple tries, Zhongxian had finally managed to make sense of the situation. It was not that there was a problem in his cultivation, his origin core was simply too powerful. The origin core formed from the Saint Ascension decipher was too stable, and it had been further refined in the Saint Ascension ordeal, which created a layer of sacred energy around it. To make a comparison, the sturdiness of his origin core was roughly at the level of a Saint intermediate tier artifact. The purity of the spiritual energy within high-tier spirit stones was insufficient to break it open. Zhongxian rubbed his glabella in distress as he halted the formation and stood up once more. I must find an even purer source of spiritual energy. He had encountered such a problem before. As his cultivation rose, his requirement for spiritual energy steadily increased as well. There was a time when his cultivation could be advanced greatly with just low-tier spirit stones, but before long, he had found himself needing middle-tier spirit stones, then high-tier spirit stones, and now, even high-tier spirit stones were not sufficient. This was not a problem of quantity but quality. If the quality did not meet the minimum requirement, no amount of quantity could make up for it. Previously, he had already felt high-tier spirit stones becoming less and less effective on his cultivation, and the quantity he needed for each breakthrough was increasing exponentially. Nevertheless, he had thought that it should still suffice for a few more realms, but it seemed like he had been too optimistic. The Combat Master Hall must have purer spirit stones. Let me see if I can purchase some from them. While Zhongxian was helpless before this matter, the Combat Master Hall might just be able to resolve the issue. After all, the Combat Master Hall was an organization that the Master Teacher Pavilion heavily invested in so as to create powerful experts to protect mankind. As such, they never lacked resources. This was also why he had sent Zheng Yang to the Combat Master Hall headquarters to vie for the position of the progeny of combat. If Zheng Yang successfully cleared the trial, through tapping into the vast resources and complete heritage of the Combat Master Hall, he would likely be able to advance his cultivation at an astounding speed. And more importantly, this was a good opportunity to temper his state of mind too. Let me ask Hall Master Xing about the matter then, Zhongxian thought. As long as he could obtain even purer spirit stones, he would be able to make a breakthrough to spiritual perception realm easily. However, such spirit stones were bound to be extremely valuable and rare. Nevertheless, he had no intention of taking them for free. As long as the Combat Master Hall was willing to sell them to him, he would surely pay a price that could satisfy them. After leaving the myriad ant hive nest, Zhongxian swiftly left the library and entered the main hall of the martial arts division, where Hall Master Xing happened to be waiting. Zhongxian's eyes lit up, and he quickly walked up to him. Hall Master Xing, it's great that you are here. I happen to have a matter that I need to trouble you on. Sunsha, feel free to state your request. There's no need to stand on ceremony with me. As long as it's something within my means, consider it done. Hall Master Xing swiftly responded in delight. He had just been wondering how he could convince Sun She to help him with the matter of the Shenxian faction when the latter suddenly said that he had a request. After everything that Sun She had done for their Combat Master Hall, mending his primordial spirit and gifting the altered vitreous heart tempering sutra back to them, he wasn't in a good position to ask the latter for another favor. However, if Sun She had a request to ask of them, that would make things easier for him. It's actually like this. I need a spirit stone that is even purer than a high-tier spirit stone for my cultivation, and I would like to inquire if your Combat Master Hall has any. If so, I am willing to pay any price to purchase it. Without beating around the bush, Zhongxian dived straight to the main point. This. Hall Master Xing was slightly taken aback. If you are seeking pinnacle spirit stones, that is a commodity that only those of Saint Six Dan and above are qualified to use, so I'm afraid that it will be nigh impossible to find even one of those in the Qingyuan Empire. You will have to head to a higher-tier empire than that. Qingyuan Empire Combat Master Hall doesn't have any pinnacle spirit stones? Zhongxian frowned. Regretfully, that's the case. Hall Master Xing shook his head. At this moment, he suddenly recalled something and said, actually, if you don't mind, We do have some concentrated high-tier spirit stones. The spiritual energy contained within them is indeed significantly purer than ordinary high-tier spirit stones, so perhaps they might just work for you. Concentrated high-tier spirit stones? Zhong Xian was bewildered. He had never heard of such a thing before. UN. High-tier spirit stones can be mined from ordinary spirit veins, but concentrated high-tier spirit stones are only found in the more potent spirit veins that produces pinnacle spirit stones. In terms of purity, they are nowhere near pinnacle spirit stones, but there is no doubt that they are still much purer than high-tier spirit stones. It's for that reason that they are known as concentrated high-tier spirit stones, Hall Master Xing explained. Zhong Xian nodded in realization. Spirit veins could be divided into several levels, too. Some of the weaker spirit veins could only produce the inexpensive low-tier spirit stones, whereas those truly formidable ones could produce pinnacle spirit stones at their very core. In those spirit veins that could produce pinnacle spirit stones, due to the incredible concentration of spiritual energy, even the outskirts of the spirit vein would produce spirit stones, and their quality far exceeded that of ordinary high-tier spirit stones. May I know how many concentrated high-tier spirit stones the Combat Master Hall has? If possible, I would like to purchase some, Zhong Xian quickly replied. Since concentrated high-tier spirit stones were purer than ordinary high-tier spirit stones, they just might prove useful in helping him achieve a breakthrough to Saint Tu Dan realm. In truth, even our Combat Master Hall doesn't have too many concentrated high-tier spirit stones. All in all, we only have 10 of them. However, if Sun Sha requires it, we can give 5 of them to you, Hall Master Xing said. That would be imposing too much on you. How much do they cost? I'll just buy them from you, Zhong Xian replied. If he were to accept a favor from the other party, he would probably have to pay it back somehow in the future. Since he was not in any lack of money, there was no need for him to owe such a debt to others for the sake of saving money. Hall Master Xing hesitated for a moment before speaking. To be honest with you, there's something that we need Sun Sha's help on. If you can help us with this matter, we will be more than glad to give the 5 concentrated high-tier spirit stones to you. May I inquire what it is? Zhong Xian was bewildered. The Combat Master Hall was one of the strongest organizations in Qingyuan Empire, and Hall Master Xing had even recently made a breakthrough to the Leaving Aperture realm. It was really a little unexpected to hear that they would require his help. It's regarding the trouble that I mentioned to you not too long ago, Hall Master Xing said with an unsettled look. Oh! Zhong Xian's interest was piqued. It's a little embarrassing, but that trouble is caused by a single cultivator. That cultivator's cultivation isn't too high, but he wields incredible fighting prowess. I fear that given the same cultivation realm, there are none in our Combat Master Hall who are a match for him. Hall Master Xing sighed deeply as he spoke with a vexed tone. He had done a rough gauge, and even he would struggle to face Principal Zhong's direct disciples given the same cultivation realm. It was likely that the teacher would be even stronger than that. If the cultivation of that cultivator who is causing you trouble is not too high, why don't you just find someone to pummel him secretly? Surely it should suffice for you to scare him off. The Combat Master Hall isn't as rule-bound as the Master Teacher Pavilion, so such should be fine, right? Zhong Xian asked. The Combat Master Hall served a differing function as the Master Teacher Pavilion. The Master Teacher Pavilion served as the teachers of humanity, so naturally, they had to be role models for others, so it was inevitable that there would be many rules surrounding it. On the other hand, the Combat Master Hall served as the military of humanity, so it was not necessary for them to be as rule-bound as the Master Teacher Pavilion. Besides, since the other party dared cause trouble despite his lack of strength, it should be well within the rights of the Combat Master Hall to retaliate. If he was the Hall Master, he would have had that cultivator pummeled into the ground first before talking the matter out. Was there a need for them to be so vexed over the matter? Cough cough. Hall Master Xing choked on his saliva. That cultivator happens to be a master teacher. He's a master teacher. Zhong Xian stroked his lower jaw and frowned. There could be troublesome repercussions if such forceful methods were to be used against a master teacher. However, that should not be a problem either. Master teachers are bound by many rules, so you can use that against him. For one, You could challenge him on something that he is not proficient in and force him to back down. Alternatively, you could bring in the master-teacher pavilion to mediate in the matter. If he still refuses to budge, then you could just capture him and have him sent to the subterranean gallery. Master-teachers were protected by the master-teacher pavilion, so it would be difficult to deal with him directly. Nevertheless, given the considerably close ties between the Combat Master Hall and the Master-Teacher Pavilion, it should be possible to deal with the other party through bureaucracy. Since the other party was not too strong, he was likely just a 6-star Master-Teacher. Even if he had powerful fighting prowess, his standing in the Master-Teacher Pavilion was unlikely to be very high. Any higher-ranked Master-Teacher would be able to subdue him easily. Zhong Xian had been placed in such a situation several times himself, so he was rather familiar with it. Surely, there was no need for Hall Master Xing to worry so much about this matter. If only it were that simple. Hall Master Xing shook his head and sighed. The other party is an upstanding and reputable master-teacher, so we dare not go too far with him. That's why we wish to invite Sun Shi to fight in our stead. His cultivation realm is at the same level as yours, and with your means, we believe that you should be able to defeat him with ease. You want me to fight him in your stead? Zhong Xian smiled confidently. That isn't a problem at all. I have never lost in a fight against a peer before. Don't worry, I'll help you knock all of his teeth out. He'll regret having messed with the Combat Master Hall. Chapter 1131, Spiritual Perception Realm. His current strength was nothing in Qingyuan Empire, but in terms of matching his peers, he had absolute confidence at victory. Regardless of who it was, well, perhaps excluding that monster of a clone he had, as long as the other party was of the same cultivation realm as him, he was confident that he could have the other party crying for their daddies and mummies at the end of the duel. To dare to cause trouble in the Combat Master Hall, he sure was brazen. As long as I, Zhong Xian, am around, regardless of which hole you have crawled out from or how formidable you might be, there won't be a shred of arrogance left once I am done with you. With Sun Shi's promise, I am reassured. Hearing those words, Hall Master Xing heaved a sigh of relief as a smile appeared on his lips. Despite possessing only a cultivation of Saint Wandan Pinnacle, Sun Shi was able to dodge the simultaneous attack from 3 of them. The great strength he possessed was undeniable. No matter how powerful Principal Zhong may be, he definitely wouldn't be walking out of a duel with him unscathed. However, Sun Shi, you still have to be careful. That trouble I told you is said to be an invincible existence in his cultivation realm. Even though I haven't really witnessed his strength in person or not, the many rumors that surround him suggest that he isn't any weaker than you. Hall Master Xing hesitated for a moment before saying. He was deeply confident in Sun Shi's strength, but the opponent wasn't easy either. It was best to proceed carefully. He isn't any weaker than me. Zhong Xian was slightly taken aback for a moment before nodding. It was surprising to hear that there was someone who was able to match him in the same cultivation realm, especially since he cultivated the Saint Ascension Decipher and successfully ascended to become a celestial saint. However, considering the immense size of the Master-Teacher continent, there might just be true geniuses who could match him. His clone was one such example. Despite being of the same cultivation realm, he didn't recall a single occasion where he could defeat his clone in battle. It was truly frustrating. Considering how wary Hall Master Xing was regarding the matter, the other party's strength was likely to be truly frightening. It seemed like he had met his match this time around. Indeed. I have never met the other party in person, but just the fighting prowess of his students is already plenty frightening. At the same cultivation realm, even I would struggle to match them. Thus, Sun Shi, you mustn't underestimate your opponent. Even you would struggle to match the other party's students. Zhong Xian was astonished. It was already incredible for the other party to be powerful, but who could have thought that the other party's students would be so formidable as well? At this point, Zhong Xian couldn't help but feel intrigued by the other party. Interesting. I'll be looking forward to meeting him then. Zhong Xian's eyes lit up. If he could fight against such a talented master-teacher, it might give him some inspiration as to how he could further his fighting prowess. Sun Shi, we have appointed a duel with the other party earlier, and it would be held a few days from while. Meanwhile, why don't you cultivate in our Combat Master Hall and further your fighting prowess? Each of our 10 divisions has complete heritages, and they might prove to be of some use to you in further developing your strength. Hall Master Xing said. Given how quickly the other party had managed to cultivate the Grand Constellation Finger, he should be able to master the other expertise of their Combat Master Hall swiftly too. With the future of the Combat Master Hall at stake, they couldn't afford to take any risk. As long as it was something that could boost their chances at victory, they would have to grasp tightly onto it. It would be a pleasure. Zhong Xian's eyes lit up. He happened to be looking towards furthering his Heaven's Path Fist Art, Heaven's Path Palm Art, Heaven's Path Movement Art, and the such at the moment, and the high-tier battle techniques of the Combat Master Hall was indubitably an invaluable asset for that. This was a precious opportunity to learn, so naturally, he wouldn't turn it down. Here is a token which represents my authority. With this in hand, you will be able to challenge any trial and enter any library in the Combat Master Hall freely. Seeing how the other party was still able to remain humble despite his astounding strength, Hall Master Xing nodded in approval. After which, he flicked his wrist and tossed a token over. Zhong Xian casually caught it. After which, Hall Master Xing flicked his wrist once more and took out a slender but long jade container before explaining, "Here are the 5 concentrated high-tier spirit stones, I'll pass them to Sun Sha first as well. This battle is truly important to our Combat Master Hall, so I wish you luck in furthering your strength." "Thank you." Not expecting to receive the spirit stones ahead of the battle, Zhong Xian felt deeply grateful. Since the other party trusted him so much, he had to return the favor and help the other party resolve their problem at its root. At the very least, he would pummel that troublemaker to the point where he would be unable to even manage his day-to-day functions. The Combat Master Hall wasn't an organization that likes of his could trifle with. Sitting quietly in an isolated chamber, Zhong Xian quickly conditioned his current state to the peak before taking out the long jade container. Right after giving Hall Master Xing his word, he quickly entered an isolated chamber to cultivate. With the concentrated high-tier spirit stones in hand, it was about time for him to push for a breakthrough. With a swift flick of his finger, the seal on the jade container vanished, and incredibly pure spiritual energy immediately began wafting from the container. Placed within the container were 5 crystalline spirit stones. Transparent, Zhong Xian could see the many streaks of pure spiritual energy flowing to and fro within it like little dragons. It felt as if they would burst out from the spirit stones at any moment and soar into the sky. The spiritual energy within is indeed much purer than high-tier spirit stones. Zhong Xian's eyes lit up. Through his observation, he could tell that the purity of the concentrated high-tier spirit stone was at least twice the level of ordinary high-tier spirit stones. With it, he would definitely be able to overcome the Saint Wundan bottleneck with ease. All right, time to begin. Whipping out a spirit stone and grasping in his hand, Zhong Xian closed his eyes. Boom! Pure spiritual energy immediately began surging into his body, and they were swiftly converted into Heaven's Path Shunchi. As ordinary high-tier spirit stones were simply not pure enough for the current him, he was only able to absorb an average of 10% of the spiritual energy within. On the other hand, using the concentrated high-tier spirit stones, he found that he could absorb nearly 100% of the spiritual energy within. The conversion efficiency was truly at a wholly different level. To put it in other words, the effects of a single concentrated high-tier spirit stone was far greater than even several thousands of high-tier spirit stones combined. Hula! In the blink of an eye, the newly converted Jinchi finally arrived before Zhong Xian's origin core. With his previous experiences in attempting for a breakthrough, his movements were extremely smooth. With a thought, he had all of his Jinchi gushing towards his origin core like a furious torrent. Jeji! Jeji! Under the relentless striking of the torrent, the incredibly sturdy origin core finally began to open. However, barely after opening a slit, Zhong Xian already felt that his Jinchi was running dry. If he were to stop at this juncture, it would render his previous efforts futile. Continue. At this crucial period, Zhong Xian couldn't afford to stop. Without any hesitation, he picked up another concentrated high-tier spirit stone and began absorbing the energy within. Hong Long. A long time later, the sturdy origin core finally broke open. An object reminiscent of an eye sat in its place, illuminating the surroundings. Along with the opening of the incipient eye, Zhongxian felt his consciousness suddenly extending beyond himself, into the surroundings. In the blink of an eye, every nook and cranny within the chamber lay bare before his consciousness. Minor details which he would only notice with just his eye of insight previously, they could all be vividly felt by him at this very moment. Those books in the distance, even if he didn't open them, he could still see the content within each and every page. This is spiritual perception. It is truly a powerful ability. Zhongxian's face flushed in agitation. Through the means of the soul oracle, he was also capable of scanning his surroundings with his soul energy. What was different about it and the spiritual perception was that the spiritual perception amplified what he could see by manyfold, as if someone had fitted a magnifier before his senses. Even the most minor of details could be perceived by him with astounding clarity. It was no wonder why a breakthrough to spiritual perception realm would result in a huge leap in one's fighting prowess despite the minimal increase in Junqi and strength. Just by opening one's spiritual perception in battle, a cultivator would be able to perceive every single move made by his opponent, allowing him to easily dodge, retaliate, or even predict the future moves that his opponent would make. If I had the spiritual perception previously, I would have been able to flee from Hall Master Xing and the others with greater ease previously. It wouldn't have been such a close shave each time around. Zhongxian thought as he exhaled a mouthful of turbid gas. While he did manage to successfully flee from the combined assault of Hall Master Xing and the others earlier one, it was by a hair's breadth every single time. This was due to a lack of his grasp over his surroundings. His attention had to be fixed on dealing with the assault he was currently facing, leaving him unable to effectively perceive the movements of the other two to guard against them. This had left him in a truly bad position. With his spiritual perception, if he were to find himself in such a position once more, he would be able to make the better decisions in view of his overall circumstances, and his escape would surely have been far smoother. Continue. The breakthrough alleviated the deep pressure that Zhongxian was feeling within from his students swiftly closing up to him. Heaving a sigh of relief, he picked up another concentrated high-tier spirit stone and began driving his Junqi once more. Spiritual Perception Realm Primary Stage. Spiritual Perception Realm Intermediate Stage. Spiritual Perception Realm Advanced Stage. Spiritual Perception Realm Pinnacle. Within an hour, his cultivation had soared to Saint 2 Dan Pinnacle. However, at the same time, the 5 concentrated high-tier spirit stones had been completely depleted as well, reducing to mere white powder. Let me see how far I can extend my spiritual perception for. With such a thought in mind, Zhongxian began concentrating on expanding his consciousness. According to the records on books, depending on the cultivation technique one cultivated, the area where one's spiritual perception could cover would differ as well. A typical spiritual perception realm pinnacle expert would generally be able to expand his spiritual perception over a radius of 400 meters or so. Those who were stronger could reach 500 to 600 meters, but there was nearly no one who could reach the 1000 meters mark. Given that he had cultivated the Saint Ascension Decipher and Heaven's Path Divine Art, he was interested to see how he compared to other cultivators. Hula. Extending his spiritual perception outward, it swiftly crept beyond the isolated chamber. 400, 500. Zhongxian counted mentally. In the blink of an eye, it had already reached the 500 meters mark. 1000, 2000. Zhongxian thought that 1000 meters should be where his limit lay, but he found that he could continue to push it forward with relative ease. Eventually, it was only at the 2500 meters mark where he found that he had reached his limit. 2500 meters, that's roughly 6 times more than that of ordinary cultivators. Zhongxian thought excitedly as he retracted his spiritual perception. He knew that his spiritual perception was bound to be powerful due to the strength of his Heaven's Path Divine Art, but he hadn't expected that it would be such an extent. One must know that the space that one's spiritual perception covered increased exponentially along with the increase in radius, so expanding one's spiritual perception was an increasingly difficult task. In terms of the space covered, Zhongxian was more than 200 times more than an ordinary cultivator. With such a wide spiritual perception, he could easily notice the movement of anyone in the vicinity, making it difficult for anyone to spring an assault on him in battle. On top of that, it seems like the keenness at which I can perceive my surroundings is far above that of other cultivators too. Zhongxian noted as he exhaled deeply. This matter was truly too astonishing. If he were to speak of it, who knew how many cultivators would be scared to death? As per his usual practice, it would be best for him to maintain a low profile. The Combat Master Hall is indeed worthy of its title as one of the strongest organizations in Qingyuan City. With even just a swift scan, Zhongxian found that the Combat Master Hall was filled with innumerable powerful formations which could easily kill even primordial spirit realm experts upon contact. It was fortunate that he had strictly instructed Ruo Huangongzi and the others to keep those of the Shenzhen faction in check. Otherwise, if they were to cause trouble here, the consequences could be dire. With my breakthrough to spiritual perception realm, I should be able to match primordial spirit realm experts now. While Zhongxian's strength hadn't risen with his breakthrough to spiritual perception realm, his fighting prowess did increase significantly. In the past, he could only subdue primordial spirit realm cultivators through springing sudden assaults, but with his newfound strength, even primordial spirit realm experts would struggle to bring him down in a fair battle. But of course, he would still do well to steer clear from leaving aperture realm experts like Hall Master Xing. Still, just cultivating a single realm has taken me 5 concentrated high-tier spirit stones. Without a doubt, the need for spirit stones in my cultivation will only continue to increase. I really have to find a way to earn money. Staring at the white powdery remains on the ground, Zhongxian rubbed his glabella in vexation. Just when he thought that he had become a tycoon after slaying the 10 kings of the Qingtian lineage, a short moment of cultivation had put him back into his place as a poor bloke. He really had to find a way to acquire more concentrated high-tier spirit stones, or else his cultivation would stagnate once more. Forget it, I'll deal with it later. For the time being, I need to deal with the trouble Hall Master Xing spoke of first. Let me head to the Fist Division, Palm Division, and Footwork Division to see what they have. Given how generous Hall Master Xing had treated him, it was only right for him to reciprocate the favor. This was how diplomacy usually worked, and as the principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, the Combat Master Hall was an ally he would want to bring over. Understanding this, Zhongxian walked out of the isolated chamber and headed to the Fist Division. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.